Hey guys, I'm Yuruzi. This is part 5 of What If Naruto Grew Up with a Pack of Demons. Growing up with a pack of demons is easy, especially when the older he gets, the more a demon Naruto becomes. But when the pack is killed by shinobi, Naruto vows revenge by learning to use his ever-growing chakra. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel and check out the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 21, Down Deep into the Darkness. Gaara woke with a jolt, immediately aware of his surroundings, and that he was lying in a nook between branch and trunk. He took a deep, shuddering breath and blinked rapidly up into the canopy as he sat up, the grating feeling of coarse bark pressing into his back. The air was scented with peppermint, and the leaves rustled in a gentle, cool wind that he wasn't used to back home. Above him, crouched on a thinner branch, was Sunny, staring down at him with eyes vermilion and orange. He was motionless, except for his jaw, that was no doubt chewing on the peppermint he smelled of. He wondered how long his friend, had been watching him sleep, and then it hit him, that he had indeed been asleep. He looked down at his arms, expecting them to be malformed monstrous, but they were his arms, and felt almost shocked that he had not suffered from a possession. I tried to wake you but you were resting so deeply. Sunny's voice was soft and puzzled. I wondered if you would ever awaken. His voice drifted off and he lifted his head and gazed into the leaves thoughtfully. Gaara returned to his feet and immediately noticed the brown-skinned demon Soren crouched not too far from them, yellow eyes unblinking as they stared at him. He didn't know how to feel about the larger demon. He seemed standoffish, which he was well used to, but at the same time, so much more interesting than he had imagined. Sunny, who was beautiful and alluring, was clearly the opposite of Soren, who was hulking, with blood-encrusted, muzzle-like jaws, and large clawed hands and feet that seemed at odds with his lean muscular body. He smelled of rusted blood, a scent that was very familiar to the sand ninja, but his presence seemed at odds with the surrounding nature. It felt as if he didn't belong. Gaara watched the claws flex into the tree that the demon held on to trunk and spied an animal's leg, most likely a deer, hanging from its massive fist. You will be go-do, humans. Soren's jaws and throat seemed to be working hard to form proper Japanese, and the demon looked frustrated as Sunny swiveled around, beaming at the brown demon. What is the word, delightful? Sunny looked at him inquiringly, and Gaara nodded. Yes, delightful. Now you can speak human tongue too. Soren looked decidedly pleased at Sunny's praise, though he tried to hide it with a ghastly scowl that put his own to shame. But yes, we must go to the semi-finals. Sunny turned crimson eyes toward him, and they settled with an unblinking gaze. You are fighting Sasuke, boy? I hope you kill him, they will allow that, yes? Sunny's pink lips turned up in a rather vicious leer, baring sharp teeth, and he felt his own face reflect Sunny's, a thrill of excitement run through him. He was among his own kind here, and he was accepted, and no one made him feel like a monster. Natsu tried to look as calm and collected as Sasuke managed to look as he waited with the few other ninja, watching miserably as the stadium began to fill with citizens and ninja alike. Sakura and Ino were conversing in hushed, excited tones as he resisted the urge to pace, knowing that Sasuke would probably antagonize him if he showed weakness. Instead he stood near Shikamaru and Shino, wishing he was as uncaring as Shikamaru and as self-confident as Shino appeared to be. His nose was still stuffed from his self-induced fever, but beyond that, he had made a full recovery, or at least 99% recovery. Kakashi-sensei dropped a hand on his shoulder, completely startling him, and gave him a smile behind the mask. Relax, Natsu. You'll do fine. No, I won't. His shoulders sagged in reply as he ignored Sasuke's scowl. He couldn't imagine why Sasuke wasn't worried about fighting Gaara of the Sand, but then, Sasuke was known, at least in his own mind, for being a bit bull-headed. Natsu was sure that Sasuke believed that there was no way he could be beaten by Gaara. Niji has a full year of experience on me. Sasuke sent him a sidelong look of disapproval, but Natsu just sighed and leaned his elbows against the railing and stared out at the soon-to-be spectators. His eyes turned, and he spotted the Sand siblings, the painted boy and his sister, looking distressed as they stood next to their sensei, eyes darting about, as if searching for someone. What happened to Gaara? Shikamaru asked lazily, lifting his head from where it had been buried in his arms as he leaned against the rail. Natsu regularly delighted in how observant Shikamaru really was without looking it, and he peered at the siblings again. Sabaka Gaara was missing. He peered up at the box where the Hokage and visiting Kazekage would soon be sitting, looking for Sunny, but the box was only occupied by Konoha ninja inspecting the area for exploding tags. It was highly likely that Gaara was with Sunny, and even as he thought this, Sunny came gliding toward him, ghosting through the crowd fluidly, his face set in a pleasant smile, a smile Natsu did not trust. At his side was Gaara, and there was an audible sigh of relief from his siblings, who had moved toward them upon sighting the third member of their team. Though he was relieved to see the blonde, to his dismay, Sunny must have forgotten to put on a shirt this morning, for he was back to wearing just pants and jewelry, his mother's jewelry, and Ino's delighted squeal was disturbing. "Sunny," Kakashi-sensei greeted. "Where have you been?" Sunny stopped before them and gave a misty smile. It was a full moon. His eyes fluttered strangely, with a look of ecstasy in them, then they focused on him, sharp and unblinking. "Natsu feeling better?" he inquired as Gaara moved on toward his siblings, though he did pause to stare coldly at Sasuke, who sneered in reply. Natsu sighed in response to Sunny's question and gave a smile. "I'm all right." "But Sunny, what happened to your shirt?" "My mother gave you several." He noticed Kiba and Akamaru appearing, looking worried and wary, sending dark glances toward Sunny as he passed and sat down next to Chuji. "It was torn," was Sunny's disinterested reply, as he was watching Kiba pass, eyes that intense, predatory look. "You should go sit down, the semi-finals are about to start." Sunny turned to where he pointed, eyes falling on Sakura and Ino, both of which gestured for him to come and sit. Sakura?" Natsu called, and beckoned. "A word?" Sakura frowned, but looked curious as she got up from her seat and moved toward him, following him away from the others, far enough that no one would overhear them. "What is it?" Sakura asked, concerned as she watched Natsu glance toward the others nervously. "Look, you're going to be fine, Natsu. I looked up the requirements of this exam, and it clearly stated that a genin could be promoted to chunin whether he wins or loses." Natsu's eyebrows rose in surprise, and she smiled at him and patted his arm affectionately. "So don't worry about winning, just do your best and stay safe. That's all that really matters." Natsu looked so relieved, it was actually cute, but then the cheer came right off his face and he was back to looking nervous. "Actually, though that really helped, that isn't why I wanted to talk to you. It's actually about Sunny." "Ha! Listen," Natsu was whispering now. "Don't go anywhere, alone with him, okay?" Sakura's face reddened, and her hands turned into ominous fists, and Natsu waved his hands at chest level quickly. Wait. I don't mean it like that. It's just that Natsu was starting to sweat, and the embarrassment fled from her veins as he leaned toward her. "He eats people." Sakura jerked her head back, staring at him incredulously. "I'm serious. He admitted it to me, quite naturally too." "You're saying he's a cannibal?" "Yes, wait, no. Well, not really." "Aw." Natsu pulled at his hair in frustration. "Forget it. Just don't go anywhere alone with him, 'cause if you go missing, I'm so gonna think he ate you." Well, Sakura couldn't quite believe what she was hearing, and as her eyes darted away from Natsu's frustrated face, they fell and froze on Sunny, who was standing 3 empty seats from Ino, staring back at her. He was smiling wide enough to show his straight white teeth, but something didn't seem right about that smile, or that hint of pointedness about them. Sakura paled, and she believed in Natsu's warning. Natsu, seeing Sakura's frightened gaze, turned to see that Sunny was staring at them, smiling, and the boy lifted his hand and pressed it to his lips in a shushing motion, grinning at them, eyes dancing in what appeared to be malicious amusement. "He's not human, is he?" Sakura asked in a shaky voice, and before he could answer, the smile disappeared from Sunny's face, and his head swiveled fluidly around, and watched as a tall pale man with spiky blue hair approached him, walking with that same grace that Sunny held. He immediately noticed what looked like blood stains sprinkled and splattered across his pale blue shirt. Both Natsu and Sakura felt chills run through them as the man stopped beside him, and everyone in the area seemed aware of him. Kakashi-sensei, who had been slumped with disinterest, was now straight-backed and staring. Sasuke was looking alarmed, Ino had shrunk in on herself, Chuji had stopped eating, Kiba looked like he wanted to crawl out of his skin, Shikamaru was leaning heavily on the railing, dark eyes, for once, intense. Shino looked well composed, Niji looked contemplative, and the sand group looked agitated, and that included Gaara. The man hunched fluidly over so that his head was near Sunny's, and thin gray lips moved. No one could hear what was being said, but a look of amusement flashed through Sunny's face, and the two moved, facing the arena and sat down gracefully, in unison, as if the move had been choreographed. They seemed for a moment to flow about the seats, before utter stillness descended upon them, and they were like two exotic statues. "Welcome everyone," a voice boomed over the intercoms, and the few of them jumped, and Natsu saw that the Hokage and Kazekage had arrived. "Please be seated, the semi-finals are about to begin," and the announcer began to thank all the villages that had attended. Natsu sighed and turned to Sakura. "Yes, well, just be careful." Sakura nodded as he moved away, heading towards the other contestants. His eyes drifted toward Sunny's friend, and he froze. The man was looking at him, with frightening black eyes, eyes that bore into him and stole his breath. He could not tell what those eyes were saying, what they were thinking. He wasn't even sure how he knew that the man was even looking at him, but he was aware when the attention was pulled away when Sunny lifted his frozen gaze from the arena and looked up at the Hokage's and Kazekage's box. And he knew by the slight turn of his head that the blue-haired man too was looking at the Kages. Both of their faces remained empty, but the focus of their eyes were alarming. Which one were they staring at with such anger, the Sandaime or the Kazekage? Sunny decided, quite promptly, that he was going to kill this Niji human, who drew Natsu's blood. He could smell it from up where he was seated, and seemed to make a fool of him. He talked nonsense through most of the fight, some type of advanced goading that Sunny did not understand, but from the occasional grunts of amusement that Diadem gave off, meant it was clearly stupid. And Sunny didn't want to waste his time on stupid. But to avenge Natsu, who was getting beaten, he would deal with stupid. 3 seats from him sat the female who smiled like flowers, though right now she smelled like frightened flowers ever since Diadem had shown up, and Sakura, who was wringing her fingers and biting her lips as she watched the fight. Her fear was a gentle flavor that seemed to hover about him, and he'd seen Diadem glance over at her once or twice. "Winner, Hyuga Niji." The man, the referee, Diadem had murmured, called out, and there was a roar of approval from the humans. Several of the ninja in the crowd peered at Natsu as he limped from the arena, and he caught snatches of words like, acceptable, and candidate here and there. He was familiar with the first word, but the second, he knew nothing of. As Natsu approached them, Sakura jumped to her feet and made to hug him, but stopped herself as she seemed to notice his cuts from Renegade Kunai. Natsu looked tired, and a bit grim as he slumped down on the nearest seat next to the human Kiba, and jumped when Kakashi leader dropped a hand on his shoulder. "You did well, Natsu. I'm proud." Natsu's frown turned up, and he seemed to drown in relief, taking a deep breath and rubbing a gash on his forearm. Sasuke boy stood on the steps near them, eyes following someone, and Sunny turned his head to see that he was glaring at the human Niji, eyes promising payback. Sunny turned a considering look towards the dark-haired human, surprised at his anger, that he apparently cared about his pack. "So tiny, so pointless," Diadem murmured, watching as the human named Shikamaru trudged reluctantly down into the arena, followed by Gaara's strange sibling. Why do they exist? Why so many of them? What could he see in such insignificant creatures? Sunny stared at his face, watching as grayish-blue veins appeared at his temples and at the corners of his mouth. Their whole lives, played out in the time of one resting. The contempt in his voice was heavy, and his black eyes narrowed as the fight below began. He'd heard of the resting that Diadem was talking about. It happened sometimes to the really old demons, the masters. Though resting was normally 6 hours, some masters were known to fall into it for centuries, something having to do with boredom, though he couldn't imagine anyone being so bored that they would fall into an extended resting. That would be centuries of being vulnerable. The scent of blood was stronger, and he saw out of the corner of his eye that Natsu was approaching, apparently having decided that he wanted to sit next to him and not the agitated human Kiba. "Well, that's over and done with," Natsu whispered to him, though he didn't know why since no one else was trying to be quiet. Sunny turned and smiled, patting his hand. "Don't worry, Natsu. I kill him for you." Natsu sent him a startled look and gave an amused grin. "Don't be silly, Sunny. He has the Byakugan." Apparently his pretty eyes allowed him to see in all directions. He patted Natsu's hand again. "No worries, Natsu. He will be able to see me well when I eat out his heart." Natsu seemed to choke on something for a moment, eyes darting from him to Diadem, before deciding to watch the fight. Foreign humans gathering in the forest, from a human village called Otogekure. They planned some type of attack. "Be wary," came Zorn's abrupt call, and both he and Diadem lifted their heads toward the west, ignoring Natsu's inquiring gaze. Clearly the humans could not pick up the call over all the noise they were making, and they were lucky to even hear it. Winner, Nara Shikamaru. The humans were amused and delighted, and both turned their heads back toward the arena. The female from Gaara's pack looked disgruntled while the human Shikamaru looked ready to lie down somewhere, face drawn in boredom. A little time passed, and it seemed that the painted male in Gaara's pack declined to fight the buzzing human, and soon it was time for the fight between Gaara and Sasuke boy. Natsu was chewing his fingernails as Sunny folded his hands in his lap and settled in, a slight smile on his face. "Ah, Kakashi, my eternal rival," a strong, rich voice greeted, and Natsu turned to see that Mato Guy had come down to see this fight. There was an air of anticipation about the humans, some even leaned forward in their seats. Sunny lifted his nose to the air as the scent of snakes wafted toward him. The fight began, and Sasuke was faster than Sunny remembered, as fast as the green-clad human had been, and he seemed close to hitting Gaara before the sand flew up to protect him. Natsu watched in silent awe, stunned that Sasuke had improved so much in 1 month, forcing someone Natsu thought to be indestructible into a ball. Literally, he must congratulate Kakashi-sensei on doing such a superb job, and he glanced to his right to see Sunny's reaction. He thought the violence and blood would have excited the self-proclaimed demon, but Sunny didn't seem excited. In fact, he was like a statue in his seat, hands in his lap and unblinking eyes focused on the battle, face devoid of any emotion. The frightening blue-haired man that Sunny had neglected to introduce mirrored him in every way. There was a gasp of awe and he turned his attention back to the battle. Sasuke had run up the side of the arena, right hand toward the ground, left gripping his wrist. "So, you taught him that technique, Kakashi?" Guy seemed vaguely amused. "Isn't that a little dangerous?" Before Kakashi-sensei could reply, Sakura piped up, "What technique? What's he doing?" Kakashi-sensei patted her head and murmured, "Just watch." Natsu watched as light formed under his right hand, Chakra, and a loud shrieking as the Chakra formed in his hand. There was a heavy groan to his right, or he thought it was a groan, and he darted his eyes to look at Sunny and his companion, but they were still statues. Sunny and Diadem watched as Sasuke boy raced down the side wall of the arena and charged toward Gaara, who had reverted into a ball of sand. Diadem was agitated with Gaara's performance, going so far as mentioning how pathetic he was, though he had called him Shikaku, and he hadn't bothered asking who that was as he watched Sasuke boy slam the ball of screaming Chakra into Gaara's sand barrier. His hand sank into the sand, and Sunny watched in concealed glee as he tried to pull his hand from the ball. When he managed to jerk it back, a misshapen, clawed extremity followed him out, reluctant to release his hand. The humans around him gasped, Diadem's lip curled up in wry amusement, and then, feathers floated down from the sky, pale white feathers all very pretty, and he stared up at them, puzzled and awed at the same time. Was someone killing a very large bird somewhere up in the sky? And, where was the blood? "Kai!" Natsu said next to him, putting his fingers together and releasing a small bit of Chakra, and that's when Sunny noticed that the humans around them began to slump forward in their seats, falling into sleep. Diadem straightened his head from staring up at the sky just as a loud boom shook the arena, and the ground trembled. Still sitting in his seat, he turned to see smoke rising from where the Hokage had sat, and there were Konoha ninja jumping toward it. A body flew over his head, and Sunny looked to see that it was a ninja, kunai out, attacking Kakashi leader. And then chaos ensued. Foreign ninja began to attack the Konoha ninja, the ground shook constantly, and beyond the arena, smoke began to arise into the sky, and all the humans seated remained asleep except for a few that were clearly ninja. "We're under attack," Natsu gasped, and he looked down to see Natsu crouched down between the seats with Sakura, kunai in hand, eyes wide, smelling of fear. The flower female and the round one were asleep. "Sunny, come." He turned to see Diadem jumping over chairs and humans, heading toward the Hokage's area, where the smoke had cleared and Snake Human had the dying human in front of him with a kunai to his throat. Sunny growled and leaped after him, jumping on several humans' heads as he went. The feathers had stopped falling, and all around him was the scent of blood, and the screams of the wounded, the dying, and the enraged. It was all terribly exciting. Ahead, it seemed that Snake Human had taken the Hokage on top of a long dwelling, and as the Umbu followed, they were thwarted by a large purple barrier that surrounded the whole dwelling. One Umbu crashed into it, and fell away screaming, body burning in purple flames. They stopped on the roof of a dwelling close to the Hokage, and that's when Sunny turned and looked about, eyes falling on the giant snakes that crashed into dwellings. They were the biggest anything he had ever seen, and for a rage-filled second he thought they were invading demons. That was until Diadem's voice echoed behind him, filled with disgust and contempt. Spirits. Pathetic. He watched as they purposefully crushed dwellings and snapped at the ninja who attacked them, and for a second hoped that Soren was unharmed in the forest. Look, came Diadem's voice, and he turned back to see what was happening behind the purple barrier. He watched as the snake human, Orochimaru, peeled off the fake face he was wearing, revealing his normal face that Sunny had seen. Then, he did a strange jutsu that began to summon 3 strange boxes from the roof, but then the Hokage called out, Shuriken Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, and hundreds of the sharp objects flew at Orochimaru and destroyed one of the boxes. But the other 2 remained, and opened, revealing 2 humans, one with white hair and the other with black, and they stepped out. Beside him, Diadem leaned forward from where he clung to the side of the dwelling, trying to hear what was being said over the ruckus of the snakes and the fighting of the humans. The 2 men from the boxes seemed to say something, and then the Hokage attacked, blowing billows of fire at them, but the white-haired one counterattacked with a wall of water. Then the water took the shape of some kind of reptile and attacked the Hokage. Mud came from the Hokage's mouth, forming a wall and stopping the oncoming water, and Sunny remembered to swallow, eyes wide as he watched real jutsu at work, reminded of his pack's attack when he saw all of the mud. The dark-haired human moved, and both demons watched as thick branches and roots grew from the wall of mud and grabbed the Hokage. The human smeared blood on one of the branches in a pattern, and suddenly, a large human-sized monkey appeared, garbed in human clothing. Enma Diadem hissed in disdain. Apparently he knew the spirit, and he watched as the monkey turned into a large red pole and broke the Hokage free from the branches. Smoke reached Sunny's nose, and he glanced back to see that the snake spirits had managed to cause a fire, and some of the humans were attempting to put it out as they tried to battle the snakes. Look at how far the spirits have fallen, servants to the humans. Orochimaru, who had been watching the fight, now moved forward, opening his mouth wide, and a snake shot out with its jaws open wide, and from its mouth came what looked like a sword. He took the sword from the snake just as the Hokage attacked with the red pole, deflecting his attacks, and the white-haired and black-haired human attacked the Hokage from behind. He's going to lose, Sunny proclaimed anxiously, and Diadem's head swiveled to look at him, those black eyes appraising. So? In that moment, the branches and roots grew more, crowding the barrier, and both Diadem and Sunny leaped onto the roof, startling the anxious Umbu that hovered before it. They pulled out kunai, ready to attack, but one recognized Sunny and he lowered his kunai. Sunny reached out and touched the barrier, jerking his hand away as purple flames engulfed it, giving out a small screech, waving his hand frantically until Diadem reached out and snuffed out the flames by simply fisting his hand around Sunny's. His hand smoked for a moment before it began to heal, and the pain faded, only to be replaced by a familiar dread that came from the barrier, and his head darted up, peering through the gaps of the branches to spy a frightening creature, about 12 feet tall, with tusks jutting from its mouth and wild gray hair. Sunny stepped back with a gasp, and Diadem stiffened. That fool of a human has summoned death. Who has given him the power to do such? Darkness filled the barrier, a darkness so complete that they could only see vague shapes in it. There was the sound of fighting, and what looked like death grabbing the 2 humans from the boxes. Sunny wanted to leave. He did not want to be anywhere near death, who made him feel queasy, who frightened him. Sunny backed away again just as Orochimaru's voice breached the barrier. What technique is this? The Hokage's voice came, pained and thick with blood. This is a Fuin Jutsu, the Shiki Fujin. You should have heard of it, my wayward apprentice. It was the same technique Yondaime used to seal the Kyubi. Sunny choked on his horror as Diadem reared back, radiating rage. He threw his head back and gave a howl of pure fury, his black teeth long and sharp, his pale skin tinged blue. The Umbu jumped away from them, a miasma of fear, for Diadem was a sight enough to make Sunny retreat, and he turned and headed back to the arena where he had left Natsu, leaving Diadem to his fury. The humans were still fighting, blood smeared their pathways. He dropped down beside a dead human and touched its body. Cold, it would not be a joy to eat, and so he leaped back onto the rooftops and hopped into the arena. The humans were still asleep, unaware that there were bodies strewn about. The arena floor, littered with craters, had bodies down there too, and instead of grabbing one of the sleeping humans, he dropped down into the arena and grabbed the closest dead human to him, ignoring several of the ninja standing nearby. The body was still warm, and he quickly tore a leg off, pulling off the pant's leg, and took a quick healthy bite, chewing and swallowing quickly as he inspected the area where he crouched and dined. One of the standing ninja he recognized, being of Gaara's pack, and the other was the referee. The third he knew, if only by smell since he was wearing an Umbu mask. Kabuto, Snake Human's pack member. All seemed to be staring at him as he stripped the meat from the leg, and they blanched in horror as he crunched down on the bone, but neither seemed to want to interfere, and so he devoured the bone of the leg and moved on to the second leg, which was still warm. Kakashi disposed of the last sound nin, dusting his hands in grim satisfaction, and watched in mild amusement as Guy sent a sand nin through a wall. Guy turned and gave him a thumbs up, grinning brightly, and he turned to inspect the arena. Earlier, he had sent Natsu and Sakura after Sasuke, who had run off after Gaara, and they had both dragged a reluctant Shikamaru with them. No doubt, they had headed for the forest. A Konoha Chunin dropped down before them, pale and sweating, and rushed up to them. Hataki-san. I have a report. There is a large squad of sound nin escaping into the forest through West Gate. Jiraiya-sama has just arrived, and the Hokage is fighting in the South District. The summons are doing heavy damage, but with Jiraiya-sama here, we think they will be stopped. Guy stepped forward. I'm going to go help out the Hokage, he proclaimed with a serious face, and then he turned to Kakashi. Didn't your team go into the forest west of here? Kakashi paled. Natsu and Sakura were no match for a squad of sound nin. Natsu hadn't gotten medical attention for his wounds, and Sakura only knew the basics of jutsu. Asuma went after Shikamaru, Kurenai assured as she peered out over the arena. Hill. Her voice drifted off as her eyes caught sight of Uzumaki, the boy Kakashi had returned to Konoha with. He was crouched over the body of a Konoha nin, eating his legs. Guy moved to see what had caused the look of horror on the kunoichi's face, and felt the blood drain from his own as he watched the small golden-headed boy crunch through the man's femur like it was a stick of pocky. Even from up there, they could hear the constant crunch of bone, and the boy's vermilion eyes darted about him as he ate, as if he expected someone to try to stop him at any moment. Oh shit! Kakashi breathed, taking in the scene and seeing the frozen look on Genma's face as he stood there, oblivious to the fact that he was standing near a traitor. As if hearing his thoughts, Yakushi removed the mask and grinned at him. Sunny looked up from the man he was eating and glared at Yakushi, who bowed almost mockingly to him, then both he and the sand nin Baki disappeared. This seemed to snap Genma out of his shock, and he stepped toward Sunny, who lifted his head and straightened his shoulders, remaining in the crouch, staring at Genma with large crimson and orange eyes, still as a statue. Genma froze, Senbon needle still in his mouth, wary of the boy's unnatural stillness, and the way those large unblinking eyes held him, waiting for him to make the next move. His mouth and chin were smeared with a fallen comrade's blood, and he could still hear the sound of his bones being ground down. Son! Kakashi called, and life seemed to return to the boy, and his head swiveled up in response to his name. I need you to go after Natsu and Sakura, they'll need your help. Sunny looked west, to where Kakashi pointed, then he blinked almost owlishly at him, as if he were having trouble coming back to himself, then nodded. He dropped what was left of the leg and leaped up into the stands, stepped on a few heads, then made one single leap over and disappeared. That was Kyubi, Kurenai stated flatly, and he shrugged in reply, and headed for the direction of their beloved Hokage. Diadem paced outside of the purple barrier, rage pouring through each step, and for a second he thought he was going to lose his human form and revert back to his natural form, for such was the rage that ran through him. Death was an incredibly final state of being, and for all that this human called Orochimaru had summoned two humans from the dead, they were still, in fact, dead. So for this yondaime to seal Kyubi away with death made it all feel very final. He grit his teeth and glared at the surrounding humans who were stuck between being frightened of him and worried for their human Hokage. Just like Sunny had been worried. He hissed and stopped pacing, pulling his millenniums of patience down upon himself, and waited for this battle to be over. As if on cue, the purple barrier fell, and the branches crumpled away, the darkness lifting. The human Orochimaru called out to his 4 human lackeys that had pulled up the barrier, and they jumped away. Several of the Konoha Umbu leapt forward to attack, but one was quickly knocked down by one of the humans with 4 arms. Diadem stepped forward, eyes immediately falling on the fallen Hokage, who was clearly dead as Enma pulled a sword from his back. The monkey spirit hovered over the body as Diadem approached, then his furred head darted up, dark eyes alarmed. Diadem, he spoke in the tongue of the spirits, voice laced with sadness and anger. What are you doing here in the realm of man? Go on, fool, Diadem snapped. The human doesn't need you anymore. My, how the mighty have fallen, you and all your kind. The Umbu approached, some crying out at the sight of their fallen Hokage, and he spotted the one named Kakashi arriving along with more humans. Enma stood up, but not before he put a hand on the dead human, and its skin instantly turned blue. Diadem snarled, the brain, which still had been good, was now ruined. Begone, demon, there is nothing for you here, he commanded in the human tongue for the benefit of the surrounding humans, who gasped, and the nearest one threw his hands together to create jutsu, but Diadem gave him a swift kick to the chest, feeling the bones crumble under his foot as he dodged a kunai and leaped from the building, dashing away. The humans were so distraught over their Hokage, that they made no attempt to follow, and he headed west toward the forest, pausing only once to see the spirit toads battle the snakes. He shut his eyes and breathed deeply and headed for the crumpled west wall, only to be stopped by a Konoha ninja. Hey! Where's your Hitayate? What village are you from? The human looked like a youngling. Diadem bared his teeth menacingly, and the human male paled, but it gripped its kunai and rushed forward. Just as it reached him, Diadem dropped his human form, flashing into the blue flame, and the human ran right into him. Connecting with the human's chest, he melded into it, rushed through its body, and crushed its small mind, pushing it to the side and locking it away. It was the first time he had ever bothered to possess a human, and as he straightened from the crouch and turned toward the west wall, he suffered a shock. The human eyes. They were so weak, they barely saw anything, and the colors. So few of them. He gasped, then put his hands to his chest or the human's chest really, and remained stunned. There was pain in his body, small minute nagging pains that the human felt probably all the time. He ran through pieces of the human's mind and discovered that it had shattered its knee 3 years ago, and it still ached. Something that would have only lasted seconds for him. He lifted the human hands to his face, staring at the tendons in the hands, feeling the blood rush through them. He felt weighted down by gravity, heavy, tired. There was a distant crash, and he turned the poor, practically colorless eyes toward the muffled sound, and realized that the human's hearing was incredibly pathetic. He couldn't hear much, the world was almost silent, his sense of smell was limited to the scent of smoke in the air. He felt isolated. No wonder the humans gathered in big areas together, they were not attuned to anything. He blinked watery eyes and squinted at the west wall before leaping toward it, and coming short, his leg protesting his human legs, and he snarled, shoving his chakra through the human's body, wanting to get beyond the gate as soon as possible. As he soared toward the wall, he felt the human's chakra coils bursting, unable to handle his chakra, and this caused the body pain. He was on the wall, and one of the Konoha ninjas shouted orders to him, but he ignored it, instead taking a nosedive toward the ground, watching as the dirt approached. Instincts told him to twist about and land on his feet, but he ignored it and crunched headfirst into the earth. Immediately, the body felt strange, empty and foreign, and he searched for the presence of the human that occupied the body, but the mind was nothing more than oozing matter in the dirt. He floated away into the forest, having released himself from the body, but he did pause to look back at the human, taking in its crushed head and broken body. Then he floated on in search of Sunny and Sorn. Sunny surged through the forest, weaving through the trees and listening to the cries of dying humans of the village, spotting a body here and there, lying about the forest floor. He dropped down before a pile of bodies, touching and sifting through a few to find a warm one, and pulled off an arm. He spotted movement, and his eyes darted up, connecting with one of Natsu's friends, the bored one, standing with an older human male with hair about his face. Both were in the cover of the trees, staring at him as he bit into the arm. "You seen Natsu?" he asked after he had swallowed, and watched as the bored one seemed to work up to pointing ahead. "They went after Uchiha and Gaara." Sunny nodded and leaped away, soaring into the trees, stopping once to call for Sorn. "Sorn! Where are you?" His call echoed throughout the forest, which had been mysteriously silent. He turned his head about, picking up what sounds he could hear, the rustle of leaves against one another, the sound of the branches bending in the gentle wind. The snap of a twig. His eyes zeroed in on a ninja slowly easing his way down a tree, kunai out and dark eyes focused on something, and as he followed his line of vision, saw Natsu crouch down near the roots of a large tree, head swiveling about, no doubt searching for the ninja that was stalking him. Sunny grinned, and slowly eased his way down the tree, pulling a few leaves with him and sticking them in his hair. "I'm way out here but I come," came Sorn's reply, and indeed he was far from the village if he was just replying. The ninja was almost on Natsu just as Sunny's foot touched the earth. He sent his chakra racing toward the human, sneering as the human froze, looking about as he sensed the chakra approaching but could not see the source. The human moved back into the tree, but it was too late as his chakra hands burst from the ground and grabbed his legs. The human screamed and slashed at the hands with his kunai, his legs crunching and burning under the strength and heat of the chakra, but the other hand wrapped around his shoulders and tore him apart. He saw Natsu jump up from his poor hiding place in shock just as a sharp pain sliced through his back, and Sunny spun to see another ninja approaching, shuriken in hand, the other tossing exploding tags around him. Sunny jumped into the air just as the tags exploded, the force knocking him clear through the trees. He managed to grab a branch as he crashed through a particularly large tree, and swung around it before landing in a crouch, twisting about so he could grab whatever was stuck in his back. Natsu shunshined toward him, face pale and covered in smoke and dirt. He stopped next to Sunny with a pant and inspected his back. "There's a shuriken in your back. I'm going to pull it out, Kay?" His eyes darted about the area as he spoke, and Sunny looked back at him and nodded. Natsu grabbed the shuriken quickly and yanked it out. Sunny let out a sigh of relief as the wound healed, ignoring Natsu's gasp of astonishment. He tilted his head about, listening for the sound of the foreign ninja, but Natsu was panting too loud and there were trees burning from the explosion. Fire was a noisy thing. "I don't know what happened, Shikamaru stayed behind as a decoy. I don't know if he's even alive and we were supposed to go after Sasuke, but then we were ambushed by Sound Nin." He wiped his sweating face, smearing the dirt and soot more, and grimaced. "I don't know what happened to Sakura, and we never." Tch. He smelled foreign blood, and his head continued to jerk around, crimson eyes darting through the trees, ears tilting here and there. Suddenly the tree lurched, the ground around its roots roiling like something was trying to surface, and the tree toppled over violently. Sunny darted from the tree and latched onto the one next to it, turning back to see if Natsu had jumped away, but the human had gotten tangled in the branches and crashed down with the tree, crying out as a large thick branch landed on him, pinning his chest and stomach to the earth. Sunny's eyes darted about as he heard and saw glimpses of the Sound Nin sneaking about, towards Natsu, towards him. Sunny opened his mouth and shrieked as loudly and angrily as he could, sure that anything with ears from miles around would hear him, and several of the Sound Nins froze, their terror reaching him, and backing away. Pinned under the branch, his breath impeded by the weight, Natsu managed a fake small cry of fear as he watched the long sharp canines in Sunny's mouth grow. The faint silver marks on his cheeks darkened as his friend turned and looked down at him, like a young devil, and gave him a nod. Then he gave a deep, half-growl, half-roar that trembled through the earth, and for a second he was in awe that such a loud, terrible sound could come from Sunny's 12-year-old chest when it sounded like it belonged to something at least 20 feet tall. He gave another fake cry of terror, understanding that they were surrounded, and that Sunny was attempting to intimidate the Sound Nins. He felt like several of his ribs were broken, along with the growing pain in a leg and arm that he could not see. He could barely get a proper breath, and knew that if Sunny didn't get help pulling off the branch, he would suffocate. The self-proclaimed demon with sharp dagger-like teeth, and he clearly had more in his mouth than the normal human, slowly slinked down the side of the tree, showing superb chakra control, before touching to the ground and whispering, "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu." The forest was suddenly filled with golden blonde flying everywhere, and between his weak gasps he could hear the screams of fighting, and it became clear to him that there had been more Sound Nin in the forest than he had originally thought. He'd thought most of them had been in the village, but perhaps they were retreating. There was a blast of heated wind, and fire roared over him, so close that he felt the heat roil over him, and parts of the tree that was crushing him caught fire. He was so dead. Sunny crashed down near him, his body on fire as he watched him roll to a stop in the heated dirt. Everything was cast in a smoky orange glow, and he thought this was hell as he called out Sunny's name, and crimson eyes looked at him rather calmly despite the fact that he was on fire, and then he puffed into chakra smoke. A bunshin, he thought as smoke invaded his lungs, and he thought this was a terrible way to die, crushed by a tree, burned and suffocated by fire. Another Sunny appeared, covered in soot, and he darted over to Natsu. He tried to say something, but he couldn't even cough to get the smoke out of his lungs, but he was aware that Sunny grabbed the heavy trunk, and he wanted to tell him that he wouldn't be able to lift the tree off of him, but suddenly the pressure was off his chest, and he was able to take a deeper smoke-filled breath only to cough and hack, sending ribbons of pain through his chest. He turned over and began to drag himself away from the tree that Sunny was holding up, miraculously, might he add, and then a Sound Nin appeared. The ninja lifted his hand, and to Natsu's horror, he saw a small gray ball in his hand, poison gas. It all seemed in slow motion. Large chakra hands burst from the ground, snatching at the ninja, but he jumped out of the way, tossing the ball of death at the ground. The tree went sailing over his head and crashed into the surrounding trees with a deafening crack just as the poison gas ball exploded, yellow gas engulfing them. He covered his nose with his good hand just as a powerful hand gripped his ankle, and then he was airborne. The world tilted, leaves and branches, all twirling and swirling about so that he was dizzy for a moment before he crashed into what felt like a thorn bush. He cried out and coughed in pain, eyes rolling about in his head before they focused, and he realized he was lying in a thorn bush, on his side, with a perfect view of Sunny, though he was a distance away. The blonde was staggering about, coughing into his hands, ugly wet coughs, and saw blood through his fingers. "Oh God," Natsu wheezed in horror as Sunny tripped into a tree, gurgling as he stumbled back, something lumpy and bloody falling past his lips, and Natsu knew it was his lungs. Chakra hands, violent reds and browns burst from the forest floor, waving about in terror and confusion, dozens of them, mirroring Sunny, who coughed and hacked up his lungs. In between came inhuman shrieks, and crimson eyes darted about in terror, grabbing at the bits of his lungs that were coming up. The Sound Nin appeared after the danger of the poison had passed, dodging the wild chakra hands, and swung a shuriken at Sunny's chest. Sunny must have seen him through his pain and terror, for he lifted an arm to block the shuriken, and his arm spun away, severed as the shuriken lodged into his chest. And Natsu could do nothing but watch. "You bastard," the Sound Nin hissed, pulling out a kunai as Sunny dropped to his knees, remaining arm reaching out to grab the severed one. He was covered in his blood, the stump from mid-forearm gushing blood while pieces of his lungs oozed from his mouth and slid down his chest. He couldn't even believe Sunny was still alive, and he watched as the Sound Nin walked casually behind the blonde and pressed the kunai right under Sunny's left ear. "This is for my teammates," he hissed, and Natsu opened his mouth in a silent scream as Sunny's eyes connected with his own, bleeding into blue as the man dragged the kunai across his throat, holding him up by his hair. Even above the cackle of fire he could hear the grate of bone against kunai and watched him fall face down into the earth. The chakra hands flopping down onto the dirt then disappearing. The Sound Nin stood over Sunny, dark eyes examining the body, then looking satisfied. That was until he was grabbed by one of the chakra hands that burst from the earth and grabbed his leg. The Sound Nin screamed and stabbed Sunny repeatedly in the back, until the hand released his leg and shrank back into the earth. Then the ninja aimed for his head, though through his tears he didn't know why. Sunny had stopped moving after his throat had been slit, but before the kunai could sink into his brain, something large and brown landed behind him, and massive jaws wrapped around the man's skull and instantly crushed his head and face. Natsu watched numbly as the man's eyes popped out of his head, and brain matter gushed out. The beast grabbed the man's arm and tore it from his body like it was a piece of cotton candy, then did so with the other arm, and so on until the Sound Nin's body was all over, and only the head was left in the monster's mouth, and then it tossed the head away, and it landed in front of Natsu and rolled to a stop a foot from his face. Natsu shut his eyes tightly and focused on trying to breathe over burning lungs, muffling sobs lest the creature find him. There was a sound, like a poorly played violin, and he opened his eyes to see beyond the brutalized head that the brown creature hovered over Sunny, anxiously with what seemed like concern, and its massive brown hand nudged Sunny and then turned him over. Natsu lifted his head to see Sunny's face. His blue eyes were staring emptily at the burning canopy. The creature leaned down and licked his bloody throat, and horrific sounds, some that he had heard Sunny make, erupted from its throat. Was it talking to him? There was a blue flash and he watched in numb silence as a large indigo wolf the size of a pony glided into the clearing, silently, as if walking on air, or maybe it was the deafening roar of fire that made it seem so silent. The wolf approached the monster and Sunny's body, sniffed at Sunny, then looked up at the brown monster. Both did not move, and Natsu wondered if they were going to eat his fallen friend, until movement appeared beyond the smoke, and to his continued shock Sabaka Gaara appeared. His face, though, seemed wider, morphed and strange, and the only way he knew it was him was that his hair was still red and he wore the same cloth and gourd on him. But his eyes were black and yellow, and he looked at the blue wolf, his face twisting in what looked like pain, taking a step toward Sunny, but the wolf's lip parted, and onyx-colored teeth bared in a clear warning. Gaara stepped back with a glare, and then the glare moved, and it fell on him, where he lay in the bushes. The indigo wolf's head turned, and familiar black eyes fell on him, and he knew it was Sunny's blue-haired companion at the semifinals. Then Gaara turned and disappeared into the smoke, and the brown creature, no demon, wrapped a massive hand around Sunny's small torso and tossed the body over a muscled shoulder, leaping into the smoke and disappearing. The blue wolf sauntered over to Sunny's severed forearm and picked it up in his mouth, and he too slipped away, only glancing back once, those black starlit eyes seeming to accuse him, and he closed his eyes tightly in response. For a while, there was only smoke, and the sound of falling and burning trees, and the pain of his coughs, but he had no energy to move, even to turn away from the head that lay before him. Then, oh shit! Natsu opened his eyes, and Sasuke was standing over him, staring down at him in alarm and concern, black eyes darting around to take in the scene, eyes falling on the mutilated head, and kicking it away with a foot before he crouched down over Natsu. Sakura? He slurred and wheezed, finally thinking on his pink-haired teammate as his vision darkened. She's fine. Then there was no pain, or guilt, or horror. There was only spiraling down deep into the darkness. Hatake Kakashi sighed, heading for Konoha Hospital, walking away from the Sandame's funeral, seeing the black-garbed mourners as he passed. Sakura gave him a weak smile, flowers in her hands, standing next to Konohamaru, who was sobbing quietly but harshly into his fists. He was mourning a beloved grandfather and a friend. He sighed again as he moved onto the streets, staring at the damage as he passed. Dozens of buildings had been crushed by the snake summons, dozens of lives had been lost protecting this village. But the villagers were already rebuilding, he noticed as he entered the hospital, people were ready to move on. He moved down halls, shoulders slowly becoming more tense as he moved toward the ICU, toward his favorite student. Sasuke and Sakura had returned fine, along with Shikamaru, but Natsu had returned in a Chunin's arms, limp, pale, bloody, and seemingly dead except that his rasps alerted everyone to life. He suffered 3 broken ribs, a fractured clavicle bone, his right leg broken in 3 places, torn ligaments in his left arm, a ruptured spleen, a cracked sternum, and severe smoke inhalation. The medics had worked hard on him for what seemed like hours, and even then he was still in the ICU. Then there was the delirious rants, in which he and Jiraiya discovered that Sunny had saved Natsu's life, sacrificing his own and dying horribly. He'd searched for Sunny's body himself, and Jiraiya had even accompanied him, unusually silent during their search, but they hadn't found his body, and he imagined it had been burned up in the devastating fire that had engulfed acres of the western forest. From what they managed to gather, Sunny had saved Natsu from the sound ninja, had pulled a tree off of him, which explained the crushed ribs and broken leg. After that, there was poison gas, and monsters, and something about a head, but they couldn't be too sure with the fever they were constantly fighting. He did know that Natsu would have to suffer with survivor's guilt for a while. Kakashi entered Natsu's room, and immediately spotted Natsu's mother and father, Kazuya Yoko and Kazuya Naota. Yoko's face was swollen from constant tears, and Naota's face was pale and lined, with shadows under his eyes. He bowed politely to them, and watched as Yoko mopped her face with a tissue, then wiped Natsu's sweating forehead, pushing his damp dirty blonde hair from his forehead. He keeps talking about poor Sunny, she hiccuped, and her already red and swollen eyes filled up with more tears. He keeps saying horrible things, like how his lungs dribbled from his throat, or how he stared at him as his own throat was cut like some kind of animal. She dissolved into miserable tears, burying her face in her tissue, not unlike Konohamaru, who had been similarly crushed upon hearing of his new friend's death. He was such a sweet boy, she sobbed, and her husband patted her shoulder gently. Yoko's head snapped up suddenly, and her miserable eyes turned fiery. I don't want Natsu to be a ninja anymore, I never wanted him to be a ninja. Yoko and Naota began, but she cut him off angrily. My boy's going to need therapy after this. He almost died, and he watched his friend be murdered. She went back to crying. That poor child. Kakashi sighed. He didn't want to be the one to say this, but Natsu is a shinobi now, and considered an adult. You can no longer stop him if he so desires. Both their heads shot up in horror. Your chance to pull him out passed when he passed his genin test and got his Hitai 8 and ID. He bowed his head again. I'm sorry. Soren crouched uneasily in the dark cave, peering up at the craggy ceiling far above him. Diadem had brought them down into a deep enormous cave that smelled so much like Sunny, minus the peppermint, that he had made a face. This is where Kyubi stayed when he was down from the spirit plane, Diadem had murmured in his mind, and as they touched the ground, he was startled by the feel of soft fur. Soren had looked down, and sure enough, the ground was covered in reddish-brown fur, single strands longer that he was tall. He walked on Sunny's fur and marveled at the sheer size of what Sunny had been, and then a gurgle and the feeling of blood running down his back caused him to remember his pack member, and he slowly placed Sunny on his fur. The youngling was a mess, trembling and coughing up pieces of his lungs, his throat having healed by the time they had arrived. He was covered in his blood, and as he inspected the lump of his arm, could see the bone beginning to grow back in a process that was slow and painful. Diadem's paw reached out and turned Sunny over onto his stomach, as he was drowning in his own blood, and they watched as his small body spasmed and more pieces of his lungs came up. The stab wounds on his back were still there, as his body had other serious injuries to take care of. What did they do to him? Zorn asked, burying his clawed hands into the thick layer of fur they crouched on. Diadem sniffed the blood and gave a snarl. It's infected, and it will take many weeks, even months for it to heal. He moved and sniffed Sunny's stump. The severed hand he had brought along was starting to turn black. This will hinder the healing. Look, he is already falling into the healing rest. And indeed, Sunny's glazed eyes stared at nothing as his breath gurgled. Quite suddenly, the blue eyes sharpened and bled to crimson, except they began to glow, and Sunny's body seized, his lips peeling back in a vicious snarl, and the air about them became heavy with a presence that made Zorn cower and the fur to rise on Diadem's back. Kyubi? Diadem whispered in question, mellow voice unsteady, black eyes going wide, and there was such a look in those eyes, that Zorn was forced to avert his eyes in obedience. Those alien eyes were focused on Diadem, who seemed unable to look away, and then Sunny's body slumped down into the fur, and his crimson eyes hollowed out with the healing rest, the lids lowering but his eyes stayed open. We should bury him, Zorn suggested after a time, and at Diadem's grunt, he pushed a thick layer of fur aside, picked Sunny's limp body up, placing him in the center and covering him up with his fur. If he could have his way, he would never see Sunny turn to Kyubi. Chapter 22, Interlude. Jiraiya lifted his head in greeting as Kakashi wandered in, late as usual and clearly looking unhappy about having to show up in the morning. Kakashi had been spending most of his afternoons and evenings at Konoha General, along with Uchiha and the pink-haired girl. Natsu was still a resident of the hospital, unfortunately, not due to the multiple fractures, torn ligaments, first-degree burns or even the battle trauma. No, it was the prolonged smoke inhalation that had damaged his lungs. The genin was hooked up to an oxygen machine, all day, and the medic seemed to be fighting the damage to his bronchial tubes that seemed beyond their chakra healing abilities. It seemed to everyone like his days as a ninja were finished, and it clearly upset his teammates and friends. What Natsu had to say between his wheezing breaths was, nothing. He hadn't been speaking much, most likely because he didn't have the energy and didn't do much beyond greeting everyone with a smile. However, Jiraiya knew of a kunoichi whom could help his young student, and he planned on finding her quickly. She suited his purpose for Natsu, and she would also serve as Konoha's new Hokage, though how he would manage to get her to agree to that he didn't know. But first and foremost, he needed to talk to the Toads, and he wanted Kakashi to be there. Something hadn't been right when he had summoned a few to fight two of Orochimaru's snake summons, and he had a foreboding feeling about it. He didn't believe that Son Kyubi was dead. It was too hard to believe that the demon had risked its life for Natsu. It didn't seem to fall into the characteristics of Kyubi. He and Kakashi had combed that part of the forest that Uchiha had found his teammate, and had found no body resembling a boy of 5'2", or even the body of a fox. There had been bodies, countless sound nin, and many of them looked mangled, limbs torn and chest cavities exposed and empty. That seemed more like the work of a demon. Kakashi nodded to him and leaned against the wall of his hotel room, arms folded in front of his chest in a lackadaisical manner. Kuchios no jutsu, Jiraiya murmured as he wiped a bloody thumb across the summoning toad scroll. For a disturbing second, nothing happened, a second long enough to raise Kakashi's brow just as there was a poof, and a toad the size of a pony appeared, spotted black and yellow. Its rectangular eyes rolled around the room quickly, before settling to blink at him. Jiraiya was startled. He had never seen this toad before. What is it? The toad inquired apathetically, staring at them. This was unusual behavior for one of them. Who are you? Jiraiya asked, blushing slightly. I'm Gamikachi. What do you want? What do you know about the nine-tailed fox demons? He tossed out boldly, realizing that this toad didn't care for niceties. The summon blinked, then made some type of shrug. Besides the fact that he is the only nine-tailed fox? Nothing. If you want to know of such a creature, ask the dog spirits. Their territory is next to Kyubi's. Jiraiya turned inquiring eyes toward Kakashi, who sighed and shrugged. Jiraiya turned back to Gamikachi. Alright, thanks for your help. The toad stared at them for a moment before poofing away. Promptly after its departure, Kakashi summoned a dog, and he too pulled up an unknown summon with square wire-rimmed glasses. I'm Jirobu. What can I do for you? The dog sniffed around quickly, its creme flesh shivering in the air-conditioned room. Kakashi raised a hand in greeting. What can you tell us about Kyubi? The dog turned its muzzled face into a grimace. What can I say? His territory is next to ours, though he hasn't been there in 12 years. His little hell-spawn foxes make sure we don't ever try to take the territory back. Did any of you know him? Jiroba frowned. No, we spirits do not associate with the demons. We barely tolerate sharing the same space. The dog settled on its haunches and nudged its glasses, clearly getting into lecture mode. They're hoarders by nature, you know, especially foxes. Anything shiny, sparkly, once they have possession of something, the likelihood of stealing it is slim, and even then they'd raise all hell to get it back. The dog made a snuffing sound of wry amusement. Probably due to their long existence, the older they are, the more petty they get. He surveyed them over his glasses in an oddly human way. The monkeys claim that Enma came across Diadem. Is it true? Jiroba moved to the window and stuck his nose out into the air. Oh yes, Kyubi was here. I'd recognize his scent anywhere. Surprising this village is still standing. He murmured thoughtfully to himself, though they clearly heard his last words. Who is Diadem? Jiraiya asked, and the dog moved from the window. A possessing demon. But that isn't what should concern you. What should is the fact that both Diadem and Shikaku are here with Kyubi. Jiroba stared at them intently. Both were Kyubi's minions, and the fact that they have reunited here makes Fire Country a very unpopular place to be right now. He looked at Jiraiya. You'll be lucky to get the toads to return. Jiraiya's eyes narrowed. What makes you say that? You forget? The toads helped your human Hokage seal Kyubi away. When he returns, he may head straight for our realm and exact revenge on the toads. Gamabunta and all his offspring are no match for such a demon. That explained the unknown toad, and the overall uneasiness of the toads he had summoned earlier. Actually, Fire Country won't be a popular place for any spirit right now. Fire Country is Kyubi's territory, and it has been since before you humans occupied it. The revenge of a fox demon could be infinite. You have no idea the reputation Kyubi has in the spirit realm. Kakashi moved away from the wall. Are you speaking of war? We've stopped Kyubi before, we can do it again. You never really saw the full might of such a creature. You took him by surprise. If he had come down here with his legions of hell spawn. The dog bared its teeth in a jackal-like grin. You can only fool a fox once. With those words, the dog summon poofed away, leaving both shinobi to stare at each other. I doubt Sunny is dead, Jiraiya grumbled. Natsu blinked grainy eyes at the door, wondering what was taking his mother so long. She'd left his side briefly to wash his clothes and bring home-cooked meals instead of the gruel the hospital provided, and he had been relieved for his moment of reprieve from her. His mother had been on him like flies on poop ever since the invasion, and since she hadn't turned up yet, he imagined that she was probably antagonizing the doctors into releasing him early. His first-degree burns had finally cleared up, and the medicines had healed his broken bones and torn ligaments, but his somewhat scorched lungs refused to function like they used to. It was amazing how one took something as simple as breathing for granted. Now each breath burned, each inhale seemed restricted, like a band was wrapped around his lungs, making breathing an actual labor. Sometimes he just wanted to stop breathing, give it up as a lost cause, but the oxygen mask practically strapped to his face kept shoving fresh oxygen down his nose and mouth. His mother wanted him home, so he could be a ruined kid there, instead of in the hospital. Natsu sighed, then coughed into the mask, feeling his lungs spasm miserably. He squeezed his eyes shut as his lungs burned angrily, and he wheezed, opening his eyes and catching a glimpse of himself in the mirror across from the window where he was currently sitting. His face had a grayish-blue color he didn't like and his eyes were rimmed red and glassy. What a mess he had made of himself. This is what happened to mediocre ninja who weren't fast, or smart, or had any special abilities. They got hurt, and they got their friends killed. His eyes watered and he swallowed convulsively, rubbing his eyes roughly. If only he had jumped out of that damn tree instead of getting stuck in it like some pathetic academy student. If only he had been proficient, better, stronger, Sunny wouldn't have had to die. Natsu flinched as a memory returned, Sunny looking at him as his throat was cut, Sunny looking confused and frightened, and in so much pain as he coughed up his own lungs. How dare he, Natsu, complain about scorched lungs while Sunny had gone through the pain of choking his up. And it was all his fault for being mediocre, for being absolutely average, for being dead weight. The door opened and in rushed his mother, her face pinched with worry, hands full of bags. Natsu quickly lowered his head, wiping his eyes so she wouldn't see that he was practically crying. When he looked up again he was startled to see that his mother hadn't come alone, but was accompanied by two men, both wearing long black cloaks with what looked like red swirls or clouds, running along them. Both wore sun hats that covered their faces from view, and both were ninja. He could tell this by the way they occupied the space in the room, and because the taller man leaning in the doorway had a very large sword strapped to his back, though it was covered in cloth. The smaller ninja had approached and stood before him, lifting his head and allowing Natsu to see his eyes, his Sharingan eyes, and Natsu gasped, coughed, and looked for his mother, who stood at his side, one hand on his shoulder, dark eyes wide in fear. She too must sense the peril that they were in. Natsu did not know this man, but he could clearly deduce that he was a relative of Sasuke's, though he had been under the impression that Sasuke no longer had any relatives. "What is it?" he wheezed, squeezing his mother's hand. She squeezed back. "I'm looking for Uzumaki Naruto," the unknown Uchiha replied in an apathetic monotone. The man behind him lifted his head, and Natsu shuddered when he saw his strange face and pale blue coloring. "I dunno, anyone, with that name," he wheezed in reply, averting his eyes from the Uchiha. The blue-skinned man moved from the doorway, and in a flash he was by his mother's side, grabbing her arm and pulling her away from him. Natsu jumped up from the chair to grab his mother, but his lungs chose to seize on him and he fell to his knees, coughing and gasping for air. "Leave her alone." "Of course," the Uchiha replied disinterestedly. "Tell us where Uzumaki is." Natsu shook his head. "I told you. I don't know anyone by that name." The blue-faced man's grip tightened on his mother's arm, and she gave a small squeak of pain. "You lie," the blue-faced man chuckled. "Rumor is, you and he are friends." Natsu removed the annoying mask from his face and took deep, painful breaths of the normal hospital air, before looking up at the two ninja. "You mean Sonny?" The blue man gave a robust laugh. "Is that what you fools call him? Sonny? Where is he?" the cold Uchiha asked, and his red eyes drifted up to look at his mother. Natsu followed his line of vision, and understood the threat. "He died." Natsu wheezed miserably. "During the sound and sand attack. In the forest." He lowered his eyes, staring at the tiled floor, feeling the cold red eyes examining him, weighing his words no doubt. Then he heard his mother squeak, and his head darted up to see her drop to his side, wrapping her arms about him. Both the ninja were nowhere in sight. He had to warn someone. "Mom," he rasped, trying to push himself out of her arms. "Mom, let go. You have to alert any ninja." Yoko wiped her face and jumped to her feet, heading to the door. No. Natsu called from the floor, pointing toward the phone by the bed. "Don't leave. Dial the number 326. He turned and pulled himself back into the chair. Gods, he was so weak. "It should get you to an official in the Hokage's tower," though it wouldn't get to a Hokage, seeing that they no longer had one. Natsu covered his face with a trembling hand as his mother's hysterical voice went into the phone. Shiki hovered in his father's bedroom doorway, hands wringing his fingers as he stared at his father, who lay on the floor, body spasming, spittle coming from his mouth. His wonderful, kind, mysterious father, who had been acting increasingly distracted for the last few weeks, now seemed to have come to the climax of his recent, distant behavior. Shiki wanted to go screaming into the streets, calling for help, get the mist medic needs to come, anyone, really, to help his father, but all he could do was stand and watch. His father gave a final spasm and became still, just a blue light floated from his back and rose into the room. Shiki stared, stunned, as the blue light hovered and flickered over his father, and then, words came to his mind, gentle, soothing, beautiful words. "I'm afraid there isn't anything I could do, child, for I have been in his body for too long." Then the light flickered madly, then floated out of the window. Shiki's legs moved and he ran to the window, and watched as the light floated up into the sky and seemed to disappear. Shiki gave a small moan and sank down to sit on the floor. His father had just floated away, and left this lump of a body behind. His father had left him all alone. Chapter 23, The Fox and the Princess. He wasn't quite sure how long he had been lying, staring into the darkness, but as mobility returned to him, he promised the first thing he was going to do was take a hefty bite out of Zorn. He groaned and pulled his arms under him, pushing himself up against the weight of fur that had covered him while he healed. And what a nasty healing it had been. His lungs had burned, his regrowing arm had ached so very much. His head emerged from the fur and fresh air assaulted his regenerated lungs, and Sunny gave an audible "ah" of pleasure. A stalagmite protruded from the fur near him, his arm shot out and grabbed it, and he pulled himself from the suffocating blanket that had covered him. Oh, he was going to get Soren for burying him. Sunny sat upon the stalagmite and blinked blearily at his surroundings, recognizing the cave, his cave, and felt a moment of contentment. That faded quickly when he was assaulted by his own smell, and he grunted, looking down at the brown stains that covered his body. He reeked, his breath smelled like something had died and rotted in his mouth, and his hair hung around him in greasy clumps. He needed to bathe immediately, and his ears twitching for the sound of water, which he could hear dripping somewhere in the near distance. He stood up, twisting his arm about to crack the kinks in his shoulders and hopped down from the stalagmite, landing on the soft fur and a body part hit the stalagmite. On later reflection, the situation had been so bizarre, so unexpected, that his very brain had problems computing his new, extra limb. Sunny turned in a stunned circle, spotting the protrusion that came from his butt. It was a long, reddish-brown tail, longer than he was tall, and it shimmered and writhed about the stalagmite as if it had a life of its own. Sunny opened his mouth, perhaps to shout, perhaps to scream, he did not know, and instead shut it and reached out a shaky hand to touch his tail and marveled as it unfurled itself from the stalagmite and moved into his hand. Sunny gasped. This was no normal tail, for it was made completely of chakra, and when he examined his butt, he noticed that there was nothing between his tailbone and the actual tail except air. He waved a finger in between the space, and could feel the constant flow of chakra coming from his tailbone. He stared blankly at the writhing appendage and waited for some type of response to come to him. Maybe this was the result of hunger, or his beating from the human, or simply the next step of his change, he did not know, except that now he wanted to curse. Soren! He all but screamed, and his voice echoed about the cave, and the sound of claws on rock approached. He looked up to see Soren crawl down a stalactite, nails digging into the little nooks of the rock, luminous yellow eyes looking pleased, but wary, to see him. Look, look, look! He pointed at the writhing tail that seemed to have a mind of its own. Look at it. I have a tail. Soren dropped down onto his fur and approached, but stopped when he was hit by Sunny's reeking scent. Glad to see you're well. Yes, I see the tail, it's very nice. But why are you mad? It's a chakra tail. He grabbed the tail and shoved it toward the lesser demon. Go on. Touch it. Soren moved away from the tail, clearly remembering the damage the chakra had done to his torso in what felt like decades ago. Yes, I see that. But why are you so mad? Sunny dropped the tail, and it moved about on its own business. I can't have a chakra tail. Sunny threw his hands up in exasperation. Chakra leaves a signature. Humans can sense chakra. This is giving me away. Why couldn't I have a normal tail? Soren's yellow eyes continued to watch him in that wary way, enough that Sunny stopped his rant and sent his pack mate a quizzical look. What's the matter, Soren? Soren had turned to survey the cave, then turned back to him. Do you feel any different? Sunny scratched his dirty scalp in confusion. No. Not really. Well, besides being dirty, annoyed, and terribly hungry. I feel pretty much the same. He glanced around the dark cave. Where's Diadem? He's got to tell me how to get rid of this tail. He went to fetch food. Soren moved away from him and headed down a narrow path. He said you would be up and about any time now. Sunny followed along, scratching at his skin and eyeing his familiar surroundings. His stomach rumbled miserably, and he knew what little reserves he had managed to build up were very much gone, washed away in his healing rest. He stretched his newly regrown forearm, his mind remembering the sharp pain, though it had been largely eclipsed by his beginning chest. The sound of water became more audible as Soren descended down into a crevice, and Sunny eagerly followed behind him, taking several deep, rattling breaths, coughing several times to clear out the remainder of blood that had settled within, and gave a sigh of relief. The burning pain had passed. The cave was far enough into the earth that the only light came from strange glowing moss that clung to the stalactites. Their minimal light, however, was enough to allow them all to see, though he imagined that a human would be completely blind down here. There were tunnels that connected to vast caverns, and he knew that they ran throughout all of Fire Country. He could tell places he had been before, or Kyubi, judging by how much to how little fur littered the rocky floor. Apparently Kyubi had a shedding problem. To his delight they came upon the water, which cascaded gently into a pool large enough to fit both of them, though it would be unlike Zorn to spend large amounts of time in water unless it was raining and unavoidable. Zorn suddenly shoved him from behind, and with a shock, he dropped into the freezing water, something he hadn't endured since his nice warm showers amongst the humans. The showers had spoiled him. Clearly, he became aware of a loud hissing along with the sound of water in his ears as his body slowly descended deeper into the pool, and as he turned, was assaulted by warm bubbles, many of them, and as he blinked them away spied his chakra tail drifting in the water, the heat from the chakra making underwater ripples. He surfaced to steam rising in the air, and in no time, the water was bubbling. Sunny mostly stayed underwater, soaking away the dried blood and grime that had settled into his skin and hair. As his brown pants floated along for the soak, he pondered his situation. He wasn't sure Natsu had gotten away from the burning forest. The last thing he had seen was the smoke, burning trees, and a clouded sky. After that he had been carried away on Zorn's back, feeling pieces of his lungs break away while fresh new pieces took its place. Then Diadem had taken them here, and he'd had such a memory, one where he was much taller, much less pain, he'd felt invincible actually, and he had seen Diadem, his young friend, floating about. He had remembered this, the complete familiarity of the cave, the belonging and self-surety, and then the memory had faded into knowledge, an understanding that he and Diadem had been friends for a very long time. After that, he had spent the remainder of that time buried, staring at nothing, feeling the constant ache of his regrowing forearm after his lungs had healed. Limb regrowth was an awful, nagging pain, and he understood that bone regrowth happened much slower than simple muscle and flesh. He vowed to himself never to lose a limb again, for it took too much time to come back. And through it all, he knew nothing of Natsu's well-being, and the wondering of this caused him to float to the surface of his steaming pool, pushing his hair out of his eyes and spying Diadem at the edge, black starlit eyes focused on him. "You have recovered." Diadem's voice glided through his head like the vanilla candy Natsu had once given him. "This is very pleasing to see." There was the scent of blood in the air, and smeared along Diadem's blue muzzle, and Sunny's stomach gave an audible groan. "We have much to discuss," Diadem continued as he pulled himself from the pool, pulling the brown pants out with him and wringing it carefully. He smiled cheerfully at his blue companion before heading eagerly back up to where he had stopped his healing rest, delighted to see an array of food piled there. He spotted a doe, 2 bears, several birds, and scattered about the bodies were sticks and twigs full of peppermint leaves. Sunny trilled in delight and dug in. As Zorn crunched away at a bare thigh, his yellow eyes watched Sunny from amongst the rocks, taking in every minutiae of the blonde youngling, looking for the dreaded changes that he imagined would be the ruin of him. He'd hunted down the peppermint to see Sunny's reaction to it, to see if he would be happy or dismissive of the plant. He had been reassured that part of Sunny's personality by how pleased the youngling was. The birds were also his idea. He had feared that Sunny had faded and the dreaded Kyubi had taken his place, especially when he saw that tail, that now charred away at a bird while Sunny munched away at a bear's heart. At the scent of the smoke, Sunny's head whipped around, glaring at the tail and pulling it away from the crispy bird, and the tail wrapped itself around Sunny's shoulders almost lovingly. Sunny's annoyance seemed to increase by how viciously he finished off that heart. Sunny's face seemed more narrow now, less oval, and his hair had grown to his shoulders. His fingers seemed a bit longer, and he had grown a few inches. These things meant little to him beyond the fact that Sunny was getting older. What he worried about was what was going on in that blonde head. The greater demons had all but abandoned the lessers when they had fled to the spirit realm, leaving them to be picked off one by one, or in packs, by the humans. Greater demons barely noticed lesser demons, as humans barely noticed animals, if only so they were useful. He knew Diadem tolerated him for Sunny's sake, because Sunny was attached to him by blood, which had become very clear when they had been reunited, and he knew that the day Sunny was no longer Sunny, that he would either cease to exist or be without anyone. Which was not acceptable, for Zorn was a pack demon, and could not survive alone, not willingly anyway. Diadem wanted Kyubi back, and Kyubi would have no use for a lesser demon. Kyubi had Diadem and Shikaku, both greater demons, and one of them a master. What did he have to offer? Sunny seemed to have satisfied his hunger, and was now picking off the feathers from the remaining bird, a duck, he thought, and he watched as the youngling stuck and twined them into his wild messy hair, grunting and muttering to himself that it was too long, and that he would have to cut it again, all the while munching away on peppermint, so that the blood-scented cave became mingled with the fresh sharp scent. All of these were perfectly normal Sunny behavior, down to him looking peeved about his missing trinkets. But how much of Kyuubi lurked within? Diadem glided around a rocky corner, muscles moving in his power legs, his eyes full of secrets. Soren's yellow eyes narrowed minutely as the blue possessor settled down near Sunny, who looked up at him in agitation. Diadem. This tail has to go. It's wasting my chakra. The youngling whined. It's not, came the possessor's calm reply. Sunny scowled and stood up, his face becoming still, and Soren felt and saw the chakra tail waver, then dissolve into mist, and its presence faded. Aha! Sunny crowed in delight, several feathers dislodging from his hair. That was easy. Now I can return to the villa. We have other things to do, Diadem interrupted, surprising both of them, and Sunny blinked at the blue demon in curiosity. Those black eyes seemed to bore into the youngling, and Soren shuddered at the thought of them looking at him that way. That snake human, what was his name? Sunny frowned. Orochimaru. What was it that he summoned, that thing? At this he rubbed his arms as if to brush away a chill. I have seen it before, many times, I think. I do not like it. Soren saw the fur ripple along Diadem's body, and watched as the possessor's black eyes widened, as if stunned by Sunny's words. I believe you. The demon's words were barely more than a whisper through their minds, for you have lived a very, very long time. I imagine not even Kayetsutsun has seen all that you have. Sunny cocked his head to the side in response, and Soren caught the slight widening of the orange ring around his vertical pupils. I believe even death would have a hard time sealing you away forever. Diadem seemed to straighten and his voice became louder. We shall find many great things inside this human's mind, this Orochimaru from the village of sound. We should go forth and collect his brain, and thus find the knowledge to release your mind from the remainder of its trappings. Soren sucked in a breath and looked at Sunny, who seemed thoughtful, then shrugged. I want to go back to Konoha and see who has survived. There is still much to learn in your misplaced affection for the humans. There is a waste and beneath you. Diadem snapped suddenly, causing Soren to jump and Sunny to go completely still. He had never heard Diadem use that tone with Sunny. Both masters stared at each other, Sunny with his crimson and orange eyes, and Diadem with his twilight eyes, and Soren cringed under the force of their dominance, could feel the unseen fight between the two. Sunny's pupils thinned so completely that they all but disappeared and the white of his eyes burst into a swirl of blood, and it suddenly seemed as if the youngling were hundreds of feet tall, looking down on them. Soren wasn't even a part of the fight, and yet he cowered by his rocks, hoping that he wouldn't be noticed, wouldn't be crushed. And then Diadem looked away, taking 2 steps back and sitting on his haunches, clearly losing the fight, and most likely all future fights as well. But Diadem didn't look embarrassed, or angry, no, as a matter of fact, he looked downright pleased. Sunny was back to looking blonde and harmless, eyes back to their normal red, chewing away at his peppermint, as if the last 40 seconds hadn't happened. He turned away from Diadem, smiling cheerfully at him, then said, one must always look after his minions. Diadem's head whipped up, staring at the back of Sunny's head, black lips pulling up to show onyx teeth, and his laughter rang throughout their heads. Then I must tell you, that the Hokage was killed by Orochimaru. The smile faded from Sunny's face as he turned to look at Diadem, who turned away and glided deeper into the cave. The two of them traveled back towards the hidden village, playing the game as they went, and Sunny had told him of the human Sasuke boy, of whom he had gotten good, and had been waiting months for the human to retaliate. Sunny was under the impression that Sasuke boy was planning something truly diabolical for him to be taking so long. He kept up the chatter, completely himself, until they reached the burned areas where he had found Sunny, and they could smell nothing but the ash from trees, and the scorched earth. That managed to put a damper on Sunny's mood, and they traveled all the way to the road quickly, peering out to see that it was empty. Sunny cocked his ears up, listening for the sound of nearby humans, but they were too distant, almost likely in the village. I'll lure you in, Soren offered quietly, resigning himself to the unfortunate company of the possessor. Sunny's head swiveled around and looked up at him, deep and thoughtful, and he watched as the youngling's eyes bled to blue. I wish the others were here. His voice went from the familiar deep baritones of natural demon tongue, to the light octave that the humans had. Everything would be better. Yes, everything would have been much better. Natsu headed quickly for the bridge where his team often met, a lozenge in his mouth to soothe his raw throat. Tsunade-sama had cleared up his damaged lungs with the expertise of a goddess, but there had been some damage to his throat that was mostly unimportant. It was simply sore all the time. It had been 3 months since then, and he had been taking training very seriously, when he wasn't helping rebuild Konoha, which had taken circumstantial damage in the attack. The villagers of Konoha seemed to be a bit shell-shocked even though they had gotten straight to work. Natsu found that the hard labor had racked up some good D-rank missions for Team 7, and had increased the level of teamwork between the three of them, though Sasuke remained as antisocial as usual, maybe even more so when he heard of his brother's presence in Konoha. He knew of what had happened to the superior Uchiha clan, that Sasuke's older brother Itachi had murdered everyone but Sasuke. He had always wondered why that was so, that perhaps the older Uchiha held some affection for his little brother and had been reluctant to kill him. But that man had seemed so cold to Natsu, so uncaring, even inhuman. It had been frightening, and he could no longer imagine that there was an emotion such as affection in such a person. What questions remained, however, was what Itachi had wanted with Sunny. Sasuke believed that the two had been in business with one another, though he did not say this to Natsu, mainly because anyone mentioning Sunny made him really upset. Sasuke had been decent about it, mostly because he knew that the brunette was having a hard time hating someone who had sacrificed his life to save his teammate. But that didn't stop him from believing that Sunny and Itachi had known one another. Natsu sighed and shook his head. Of course, he didn't believe such a thing, and neither did Kakashi-sensei and Jiraiya-sensei, who both had questioned him deeply on the encounter several times over. They'd also asked him about the other monsters that he had seen, the blue wolf and the brown monster. These two seemed to be the object of both the ninja's attention, and they had gone very still when he had made the connection of the blue wolf to the strange man asking about summoning contracts. He couldn't help notice how apprehensive they were about Sunny, even though he was dead. Another big talk these last few weeks was about Suna and Gaara of the Sand's defection. Apparently the Sand Nin had returned home extremely agitated, ignoring orders and leaving the village without permission. He had eventually killed several guards and disappeared. Everyone was speculating where he had gone, or who he had joined. Natsu had an eerie feeling that Gaara was going to come here, and by the increase of guards, and the intense looks at any boy who had red hair, he wasn't the only one who thought so. Sasuke, in one of his more talkative moments, had mentioned that when he had chased Gaara into the woods, and was about to fight, the Sand Nin had suddenly become distracted, and had left him right before the battle started, which was how Sasuke had found him. He'd been chasing after Gaara. Something bright and blonde caught his eye, and Natsu turned his head, freezing as his brain took in what he was seeing. He opened his mouth, eyes wide, and managed only a grunt. It was Sunny, frail and taller than he remembered, with his halo of hair crowding his face and shoulders, littered with brown and white speckled feathers, and he glided through the villagers like he was walking on air. His eyes ran over his body, taking in the unmarred neck and perfectly functional arm that swung languidly at his sides. Sunny stopped and lifted his head to the wind, nostrils flaring, and then those blue eyes opened and looked directly at him. A smile bloomed on his face, and his lips moved as he glided toward him, but Natsu could hear nothing beyond the pounding of his pulse in his ears. Sunny should be dead. There was no way he could have survived through mustard gas and a slit throat. It was. Natsu. His voice was only a little deeper than Natsu remembered, but he said it the same way, with the same inflection on the N. Impossible, Natsu breathed as Sunny stopped in front of him, the familiar whiff of peppermint in the air. How? He stuttered, and Sunny looked him over, most likely also searching for wounds. Then he peered at him, his smile becoming more puzzled. What's matter, Natsu? How are you alive? You should be dead. His whole body felt cold and yet he had broken out into a sweat. Sunny's puzzled smile faded into a frown and he cocked his head sharply to the side. Dead? Why would I be dead? Be because you breathed in poison gas. He exclaimed incredulously. And you got your throat cut open, okay, maybe, just maybe you could have survived that, but not poison gas. No one has lived after breathing that stuff in. He leaned against the side of the building, feeling quite weak of a sudden. It's just impossible. Sunny stared at him, scratching his scalp and messing around with one of the feathers before stating quite frankly, I'm a demon. The poison was temporary. Then he was back to looking cheerful as if the subject was closed. Natsu opened his mouth to protest, but shut it as full knowledge arrived. Sunny was alive. He was alive, the clear opposite of dead. Natsu leaped forward and gripped Sunny's bony shoulders, squeezing them very tightly, blinking back a well of tears. Sunny was alive. Sunny beamed at him, then to his own shock, leaned forward and pressed his lips against Natsu's forehead. Natsu gasped and jumped back, rubbing his forehead vigorously. What the hell was that? He all but shrieked. A kiss. Sunny was swinging his arms at his sides, eyes shut, face still grinning, oblivious to Natsu's embarrassment. He glanced around, hoping no one had seen a half-naked boy kiss him. "Geez, Sunny. I didn't know you were into guys. You can't just toss that out on me." Sunny was back to looking puzzled. "But I like you," he replied quickly. "Well, I don't like you that way. We're just friends." Sunny looked so confused that it would have been funny if he wasn't so far out of his comfort zone. "Mayu said a kiss was to show you like someone." Sunny's tone was heavy with accusation. "Oh no, oh, okay, I see," Natsu sighed in relief. Apparently whoever this Mayu was, she hadn't explained kissing very well. What Mayu should have told you was that kissing is done by mothers and fathers, or, people who want to mate. Of course, he was oversimplifying it, but by Sunny's appalled expression, it had done its job. Sunny murmured, looking horrified. "I don't want to mate with you," he stated with a grimace and an actual shudder. "No kissing. Great." Natsu grinned, clapping Sunny on the shoulder. "And now that horrific incident of embarrassment is over with, I gotta take you home. Mom will be so happy to see you. And you need a shirt. And some food." Lots and lots of food. He could count each one of Sunny ribs and the notches along his spine. He kept expecting Sunny to keel over from malnutrition, but the blonde moved along like he was the epitome of health. "Where have you been these last few months?" he asked, watching as Sunny's eyes darted from people to buildings, to reconstruction, small strange noises coming from his throat, even though his mouth was closed. "I was in a cave, healing," he replied pleasantly, and lifted an arm, the arm that had been cut off, and shook it with a grimace. "Took much too long to heal, hurted." Natsu swallowed thickly, trying not to imagine what kind of pain he must have been in. He opened his mouth, to apologize for getting Sunny into that mess, for getting him hurt, but Sunny stopped walking, stopped moving, even seemed to stop breathing, his blue eyes trained forward, and when Natsu looked, realized that Kakashi-sensei looked much the same, except his eyes seemed to be more grim. He should have been at the bridge waiting for him, that is, if he had shown up on time, which he never did. "So you are alive," Kakashi-sensei murmured, stunning Natsu. What did he mean, are alive? Had he known that Sunny was alive all along while he tortured himself for his failings? "I never got to thank you for doing your job and protecting a fellow Konoha ninja," he said quietly, and it felt as if no one was in the village beyond the three of them. Sunny turned his head to the right, as if he were going to look at someone else, except that his eyes remained on Kakashi-sensei, so that he was looking at him from the corners of his eyes. It was a strange move in a series of strange moves that he had seen Sunny do in the time that they had become friends. "I should take you to the tower to see Tsunade-sama, Konoha's new Hokage." Sunny's head turned forward again, a brow furrowed. "Old man, Hokage dead?" He seemed to be having a difficult time expressing what he wanted to say. "Yes," Kakashi-sensei replied with a nod. "He died honorably, protecting this village and all the beloved and precious life in it, as all Hokages do." Natsu had an eerie feeling that there were double meanings to Kakashi-sensei's words, and watched as Sunny's eyes roved about the village, as if looking for this precious life that Kakashi-sensei had mentioned. "Right," Natsu stated, breaking the strange silence that had fallen around them. "I guess we should go to the tower then, Mom'll have to wait." They started along in the direction of the tower, Kakashi-sensei in front of them while Natsu kept up the banter. "You'll like Tsunade-sama. She's kind, and beautiful, and very, very strong, I mean, as powerful as Jiraiya's strong." At this Sunny gave him a sidelong look, like he didn't care much about how strong she was. He supposed Sunny would have preferred Sandaime, and he too wished the kind old man was still here, if only so they could talk, and share candy, and things could be back to normal. But Tsunade-sama was nice, and funny, and had taken good care of him when she had arrived with Jiraiya-sensei. She'd told him that he reminded her of a little brother she once had, which had been real sweet of her, and he imagined she treated him the nicest of all the other genins because of this. And so he knew that he wanted Tsunade to like Sunny as much as she liked him. Except, he had a feeling it wasn't going to work out that way. Seeing Sunny before him, alive and well or maybe just functioning, had put Kakashi through a torrent of emotions. Relief, foreboding, apprehension, dread. He and Jiraiya had gone over the possible threat of Kyubi, which seemed more possible than ever these last few months. True to Jirobu's words, ninja all over Fire Country were reporting that some of their summon contracts weren't responding, and if so, only when they were far from Fire Country. Sunigakure was in an uproar because their Jinchuriki had gone missing on them, and to top that off, several other Jinchuriki were reported to have been captured by the Akatsuki, a new, potentially powerful foe. Tsunade had her reluctant hands full, and now Sunny had returned, looking starved and slightly predatory. Kakashi had the urge to stop by a stand and offer Sunny something to eat, and by Natsu's frequent glances at Sunny's ribs, he felt the same way. He spotted Kurenai with Hinata in front of a shop, and her red eyes zeroed in on Sunny, her mouth opened, looking alarmed and stunned. She looked at him, and Kakashi shrugged in reply. He saw Kiba approaching Hinata, and the dog lover's face turned white when he spotted Sunny. They made it to the tower in 10 minutes, and that was when he overheard Sunny's strangely accented voice ask, "Who has my necklace?" "What?" came Natsu's puzzled reply. Sunny was silent for a moment. "Hokage took my necklace and gave me new ones. But they are gone. I want mine back." There was a hint of malice in his tone that caused Kakashi to glance back, only to see that Sunny was staring directly at him. "You won't be getting that necklace back, son," he replied apathetically, and the blonde demon's face became still and empty, but his pupils thinned and became those dangerous vertical slits. As they approached the Hokage's door, the Umbu guarding it gave a slight gasp. "I don't believe it," he muttered behind his mask, and as Kakashi knocked on the door, Sunny moved toward the Umbu with a cruel smile on his ethereal face. "Still smell like blood," he mocked, and the Umbu's fists clenched in response. "Son," Kakashi only had to say his name, and Sunny moved away from the Umbu to stand next to Natsu, whose eyes darted between all of them, taking in their actions with a crease between his brows. It surprised him that he still had some control over Sunny. He'd gotten it in his head somehow that if Sunny returned, it wasn't going to be in human form, and it wasn't going to be alone. He expected the black-eyed Diadem, and the mentally unstable Gaara or Shikaku. He'd been expecting many things, not semi-simple Sunny. How had this boy gotten back into the village without alerting every Chunin, Jounin, and Umbu that had been cautioned to look out for anything that resembled him? And it wasn't like Sunny was hard to spot. His hair gleamed, his skin glowed, though it was a more pallid glow than the golden one he remembered, and he was shirtless. Even the way he walked could catch someone's eye, like he was walking on air, like he had muscles in places normal people didn't. It was, apparently, how a demon walked, for he had seen it in Diadem too. "Come in," the Godame called, and Kakashi opened the door and gestured the two boys in, and wasn't surprised when the Umbu invited himself in, along with 3 others. It was a sense of déjà vu, Kakashi managed to think as he shut the door behind himself. If only they had the chair and Ibiki, it would be that interrogation all over again. He suppressed a sigh. Jiraiya should be here, but he had gone out to gather information on the Akatsuki. Just before the door closed, there came a terrified squeal in the room, and Kakashi spun to see Tsunade-sama's pig leap from her apprentice Shizen's arms and scramble for the door, exiting quickly, screaming at the top of its lungs all the way down the hall. Kakashi shut the door and turned to survey the occupants. Tsunade-sama sat at the large oak desk, blinking in surprise at the door, looking just as startled as Shizen and Natsu. The Umbu made no motion as to whether they were disturbed that the animal had fled Sunny's presence, and Sunny himself seemed more interested in Tsunade than some frightened animal. The boy was peering at the woman, a small smile on his face. "Pretty," he muttered to himself, and the Godame leaned back in her chair, honey brown eyes running over the thin form. "I don't know whether to be flattered by your remark or alarmed." She tapped a finger thoughtfully against the table, and Sunny's eyes darted to its movement, staring at it as Tsunade-sama watched him. "Are you well?" she asked after a moment of silence, in which Natsu had scratched an arm, a nervous gesture that Kakashi was familiar with. Natsu tended to be rough on his skin when he was uncomfortable. Sunny cocked his head at her question, looking confused. "You look like you haven't eaten in a while," Tsunade-sama explained, and the smile returned to Sunny's face, and he nodded. "I ate," he paused, and Kakashi knew that he was searching for a word. "Recently." And they all wondered, what or more like who he had eaten, and one of the Umbu spoke up. "What unfortunate soul did you devour, demon?" The Umbu spat, disgust and rage thick in his voice. Natsu turned alarmed eyes to him, but Sunny seemed uncaring in that he merely glanced back at the Umbu and smiled charmingly. "Maybe your mother," he spoke in a soft tone, and the Umbu gave a guttural snarl, moving forward to attack the blonde. Kakashi was there in a second, grabbing the enraged Umbu and jerking him back. The other Umbu closest to them grabbed his other arm and held him in place. "You bastard!" the Umbu shrieked, and Kakashi felt alarm course through him. This Umbu must have lost family in the Kyubi attack almost 13 years ago. You slaughtered thousands and you dare show up here like you own the place? How dare you? I'll kill you. Natsu backed away from Sunny, but seemed more alarmed by the Umbu. Calm down, Tsunade was ordering, but Sunny chose that moment to state, quite boldly too, actually, I do own the place. Everyone froze for a second, enough time for the Umbu to twist his arm out of Kakashi's grip, while simultaneously elbowing his other comrade in the throat. The other Umbu gurgled and released him, and he hooked a leg around Kakashi's and sent the special jounin to the floor. The moment he hit the floor, he was already moving toward Natsu, who would get badly hurt in a few seconds if he didn't get him out of the way. As he grabbed the frozen youth by the shoulder, a deep, reverberating growl shuddered through the room, and a blast of the familiar, angry, evil, chakra blew through the room. A blast of heated air knocked him forward, pushing him into Natsu and sending them both to the floor. He would have laid there on his student to protect him, but there was the sound of fighting and shouting ringing throughout the room, and his ninja instincts rarely called for inactivity. Kakashi leaped from Natsu, spinning around with a kunai, and took in the scene. 3 of the Umbu were actively engaging an enraged Sunny in combat, but were jutsu trapped by the small room, unwilling to perform large jutsu because of the proximity to the Hokage and each other. What had him alarmed, however, was Sunny, and his very long, very familiar chakra tail. It writhed and smashed around the room, attacking the 2 Umbu while Sunny attacked the enraged Umbu. His frail body was quick and fluid as he slashed claws at the Umbu's mask, carving deep grooves into the wood whenever he got a hit. The Umbu, all the while, screamed words they could not understand, and swung his kunai with pristine expertise, catching the demon several times in fatal places, the jugular, the eyes, the belly, but the moment the kunai left, the second Sunny's flesh opened, it closed, and Sunny kept moving as if he didn't notice. Except for when a kunai sank into his eye again, the demon gave a grunt and jumped back from the Umbu, pulled the kunai out of his eye and tossed it at the Umbu. The man moved to dodge, but the speed of the kunai caught him in his shoulder, lifting the crazed Umbu off of his feet and pinning him to the wall. The Umbu screamed in pain as Sunny leaped for him. Kakashi pulled out his shuriken and spun it, hamstringing the youth just as Tsunade leaped forward and punched the small blonde in the head. It was a testament to her unnatural strength that Sunny flew across the room and crashed into the wall, crushing wood and plaster, almost going through the other side. It was also a testament of Sunny's abilities that the boy did not lose consciousness, instead flopping to the ground, red demonic eyes rolling in their sockets. His tail flopped on the floor, writhing as if in pain just as the door opened and more Umbu popped in. Most immediately moved towards Sunny, the room filled with the Kyubi chakra and human killing intent. Everybody stop! Tsunade-sama bellowed, and the now crowded room became still, except for Sunny and his tail. The blonde was slowly getting to his feet, eyes still rolling, and he placed one hand against the wall to steady himself. Natsu slipped from behind him and rushed past the Umbu, approaching his blood-covered friend. Sunny's rolling eyes stopped and they focused on the Hokage. This is my place. He growled in a deep, unnatural voice, and most of the Umbu broke out in a sweat. This is my territory, and no one tells me to leave. His small mouth was full of sharp teeth that cut into his lips as he spoke, eyes darting around to take them all in. When the eyes fell on him, Kakashi's spine stiffened. The whole of Sunny's eyes were red, filled with blood, and only a orange ring of fire remained where his pupils usually were. But it was the feeling, the sheer sense of inferiority that crashed through him, that he was in the presence of a great and timeless being, a creature that could crush them all without a thought. How had Yondaime prevailed against such a creature? Jirobu's words flashed through his mind, that they had not yet seen the true potential of such a creature, that he had been taken by surprise. Could they take him by surprise again? Was that even possible? All right, someone was whispering, and when Sunny looked away from him, and he could breathe again, he saw that it was Natsu, by Sunny's ear, next to a creature that could kill him without thought, whispering, "Let's everyone calm down. There's no reason not to talk this all out like the intelligent beings that we are. We are, aren't we?" Sunny became still, that unnatural stillness, and the tension seemed to thicken, and then, the chakra tail that was in the process of cooking the floor suddenly dissolved into heated mist, and when it cleared, Sunny was standing calmly next to Natsu, eyes back to that brilliant blue, looking calm, except for there was blood about him. Why was Natsu even a ninja? He was a born diplomat and natural mediator. Not only had he calmed down a completely deadly situation, but had calmed down a demon. And then someone gave a gurgled groan, and they were all reminded that there was an Umbu pinned to the wall. The Umbu quickly moved to pull out the kunai and get him down, but the situation became difficult when it was realized that the kunai had disappeared completely into the man's shoulder, hilt and all, and they were forced to dig out the wall around the shoulder so they could get him down. The Umbu managed to deal with it in pained silence, and spent that time glaring hatefully at Sunny, whose head seemed to twist and turn, as if he were trying to stare at the man from different angles without leaving his spot by the crumbled wall. His movements were very bird-like. When the Umbu was carried away in a gurney, and more than half the Umbu stayed outside of the room, Tsunade-sama sat down in front of her desk, which had been crushed on one side by Sunny's tail. Most of the room, actually, had scorch marks where Sunny's tail had landed, and he was surprised that the room hadn't caught fire, though it felt like they were all standing in a sauna. He spotted two of the Umbu, the original ones in fact, nursing burns on their arms, first degree, Kakashi thought on first glance. It meant that they had successfully dodged full contact, but it also said that if that tail actually touched them. Most ninja that had fought against Kyuubi had been crushed by one of his 9 tails, and he remembered the giant fox hadn't done much in the beginning but let those tails do the damage. Alright, Tsunade-sama began in a calm authoritative voice. We are indeed intelligent beings. She nodded her approval at Natsu as she said this, and we'll talk like one. Do you agree? Sunny wiped blood from his lips with a finger, and Kakashi thought that it seemed a bit longer than normal, with a sharp-pointed fingernail at the end. The blonde's eyes darted around the room, then nodded. Alright, Tsunade-sama leaned back into her chair again, hands resting on the edge of the desk. Why don't we just air out the dirty laundry, get this all out of the way? She was staring intently at the blonde, finger once again tapping against the table. She wants you to be frank, truthful, Natsu whispered to Sunny, and the boy turned his head toward Natsu but kept his eyes on Tsunade, giving a small nod. There was a brief knock on the door, and Kakashi was surprised to see Sarutobi Asuma slip in, without the usual cigarette. He moved and leaned against the wall next to Kakashi, eyes taking in the damaged walls and floors, the occasional sprinkle of blood. Then he focused his eyes on the blonde, who was still staring at Tsunade with his head turned to the side. Why did you come to Konoha? Sunny's head moved forward, eyes drifting to the ceiling as everyone held their breath. This is my place, he started, and next to him Asuma jumped, stunned to hear the deep demonic voice coming from the bony, blonde child. It has been my place for a very long time, and no one is going to chase me from it. At this his chakra rose, and rage filled his eyes. The Umbu prepared for another fight, and Natsu rested a hand on his shoulder. This seemed to work, and the blonde went back to looking calm and half empty. But that can't be the only reason, Tsunade-sama gleamed. What other reason brought you here? Sunny's eyes narrowed, bleeding back to red, and he lifted a hand and casually picked a thin needle from his right shoulder blade, flicking it to the floor. Kakashi blinked in surprise and glanced over to Shizune, who was standing at Tsunade-sama's side, looking a bit embarrassed. When had she poisoned him? Not that it mattered, for Sunny showed no signs of poisoning. It was likely he just noticed there was a needle in his flesh in the first place. Ninja wiped out most of my family. I came from beyond the grass to learn jutsu, so I can exact revenge. Tension rose in the room, and Natsu paled visibly. On us? Tsunade wanted to clarify before moving into action. No. On them, the ones who took from me. They must pay, and there was a hissing click to his words. I think he means ninja from Earth Country. That's where he used to live, Natsu added, nervous eyes darting around to everyone in the room. Tsunade-sama's eyes narrowed. And what of Konoha? What of it? Sunny seemed to be losing interest in the conversation, a hand lifting to nudge a feather in his hair. His voice also became higher in pitch, more human-sounding, more natural. You've simply come here to learn jutsu, then what? Leave? Sunny waved his hand dismissively. I learn jutsu, I go find ninja and kill them. Then, he gave a shrug and dug into his pocket, pulling out a wad of peppermint leaves and stuffing them into his mouth. I see. Tsunade-sama leaned forward, placing her elbows on the table, intertwining her fingers and stared out at Sunny like he was a particularly interesting creature. Who is this Diadem? Asuma startled them all, and Sunny lifted his head and peered at the man. He tried to steal my father's body. I want to know who he is. Who your father? Sunny seemed only vaguely curious. Asuma's lips pursed. He was the late Hokage, Natsu hissed quickly. You know, Sandame. Recognition passed over Sunny's face, then a flash of sadness, and the boy looked at Kakashi. Orochimaru killed him. Kakashi nodded and watched as the pink lips thinned, and the red eyes glowed with fury. He saw new interest bloom in Tsunade-sama's face, and he knew she was thinking what every ninja besides Natsu was thinking at that moment. How could they use this creature? How much damage could they exact with such a tool? He is my minion. Sunny's voice destroyed their thoughts with the level of malicious amusement it held, and they remembered the original question. What did he want with my father? The blonde grinned at Asuma, bearing the mouth full of deadly teeth. His brain, and he seemed to get a kick out of watching their faces pale. To eat, he added, and watch them all swallow convulsively. His eyes drifted away from them and he spoke again, almost as if to himself, so much to learn from eating brains. What can you learn? This was from Shizun, who hadn't spoken until now, and her face was full of medicine interest. Sunny smiled at her. Everything, he replied in an almost dreamy tone, and his crimson eyes began to glow strangely. Shizun sucked in her breath and asked the question they all now wanted to know. Then, why try to learn jutsu the normal way when you could just steal it from a powerful ninja's brain? At this the Umbu stiffened and waited for a reply. Sunny grimaced and waved his hand dismissively. Brains not so tasty, he said, and then the grimace faded and his eyes glowed even more. They suddenly seemed older somehow, and then of a sudden, they seemed ancient, and it was all they had not to avert their eyes and cower before him. Besides, and his voice was just as ancient as his eyes, his presence. I know of a fool who ate too many brains, and treacherous he became. And as suddenly as it was there, it fled, leaving the blonde looking slightly confused, as if he didn't know where the words had come from. Except the rest of them understood that pieces of Kyubi's mind were littered throughout Sunny's psyche. There was a silence about the room, no one knowing what to say, and Sunny munching away on peppermint leaves and looking like he was on his way to forgetting that he wasn't alone in the room. So, Natsu said suddenly, and they all looked at him. Why don't we get you some clothes, eh? Clearly making that their cue to exit. Tsunade-sama looked like she wanted to protest but then spoke something completely different. Tell me, Sunny. Do demons have honor? Sunny looked at her in clear surprise. Doesn't everything? A good question. By your honor, do not betray us. Sunny's blonde brows rose, his mouth opened, and he gave a clear trill of laughter, taking Natsu's hand and pulling his student out the door, his laughter still ringing even as the door shut. I don't see what's so damn funny, Asuma grumbled, pulling out a cigarette. Kakashi sighed and his eye moved about the room. With Sunny back, no doubt the Akatsuki would return, though he imagined that even if they managed to capture him, there would be no demon to extract. The only question remaining was, is Sunny Kyubi, or is Kyubi Sunny? Which personality, which memory, would prevail? Chapter 24. Jiroba crested the craggy rocks, his glasses slipping down his muzzle yet again as he peered over the rocks down into the land that no longer belonged to the dogs, and had been taken over by the nine-tailed fox millenniums ago. Normally a very noisy type of demon, the last 12 years had been unusually quiet ever since Kyubi's abrupt departure, and his hell foxes had become unnaturally reclusive. The dogs hadn't for a second believed that the fox had abandoned his territory, but a few of the courageous, or insane, in his opinion, had ventured over the boundary into the foxes to test the theory. The hell foxes had come at the dogs from their little caves, holes in the ground, and they knew that Kyubi still owned the land. But they had been so silent the last 12 years, that now the yipping and howling drew the attention of every dog. Down in the plain was a horde of hell fox, writhing and rubbing about one another, all reds and browns, all with two long wild tails. Their vermilion eyes glowed, and the mass of them caused the collective light from their eyes to bathe the area in a red light. Jiroba resisted the urge to shrink back as he spotted a four-tailed hell fox, and this one stood on its hind legs, face flatter than the other hell fox, so that it had an almost humanoid appearance. Its face was split in a grin, dagger teeth constantly gleaming, forever a sinister smile on its face. It moved fluidly amongst the horde, and the hell foxes brushed up against its legs and tails. Then the hell fox turned abruptly, its crimson eyes connecting with Jiroba's pale ones, and the dog sucked in his breath as the four-tailed hell fox moved through the horde and made its way up the crags that separated the nine tails from the dog's territory. It stopped before him, cresting at 8.5 feet, made of red muscle and sinew, and grinned down at him. What is it that you want, spirit? Jiroba shrugged. It was best not to show fear in front of such a creature, it excited them. I was curious, you have been so quiet for so long, that your sudden activity has intrigued me. Tell me, is it because of Kyubi? A reverberating growl came from the four-tail's chest, the teeth seemed to shine more, but he could sense no aggression in the sound. Soon we will be reunited, soon Master Kyuubi will call upon us again, War, More teeth. Perhaps. Whatever Master Kyuubi desires, for we are his obedient children, The tails moved forward and attempted to touch him, causing Jirobu to step back into the safety of the dog territory. The four-tailed demon continued to smile, red eyes watching him before it turned away and fluidly drifted down the rocks. They called themselves his children, but Jirobu had once seen them drop from his fur, and he had been under the impression that they were merely pieces of the nine-tailed fox. He moved from the border quickly, mind full of thoughts, as it usually was. Surely, it would not be safe for any summon to be near Konoha, and he was doubly glad he wasn't a toad. First things first, Natsu said as they headed toward his house. A shirt. He was relieved that they had made it away from the Hokage's tower with all their limbs attached. He had hoped for it to go well, but he should have known better. Sunny seemed to rub many people the wrong way effortlessly, and no one seemed truly happy that the blonde was alive. A small smile graced his face, at least he knew of one person besides him that would be happy to see the blonde. His mother. Natsu, you sound funny, Sunny voice interrupted his thoughts and he looked over at him, seeing his concerned face. Got some permanent damage from the fire, that and most likely puberty. What's puberty? Natsu scratched his head uncomfortably. You know, when your hormones change and stuff, and your voice gets deeper, and you get taller. See, he pointed out, your voice is already deeper, and you've grown an inch or two since I last saw you. Sunny sent him a thoughtful look. I not noticed. Natsu nodded as they approached his house. You usually don't. Other people tend to point it out, he said as he opened the door and ushered the blonde in. Hey Mom. Look who's here. Her head popped out of the kitchen, her dark eyes going wide the moment they landed on Sunny. Sunny! She shrieked, charging into the room and wrapping her arms around the blonde. How? We thought you were dead. She rained kisses all over the boy's face, and Natsu held back a laugh at the look of horror on his face. He weaseled his way out of her grip and wiped his face, sending her alarmed looks. Calm down Mom, Natsu admonished before Sunny could say something damning. Sunny's apparently tougher than he appears. At that, Yoko's eyes narrowed as they ran over Sunny's body. Gods, you're so thin. You must have been sick this whole time. She pulled the blonde into the kitchen, and began to dig around in the cupboards. I'll get you something to eat, put some meat on those bones. While his mother's back was turned, Natsu gestured for Sunny to follow him, and they both headed into his room. Immediately he dug around for a clean shirt that he wasn't going to wear and found a gray one, which he handed over to the blonde, watching as Sunny put it on gratefully. I should probably get you a new pair of pants too, he muttered, his eyes falling on the dark stains that graced areas of the pants. As he dug for something in Sunny's size, he addressed the thing that plagued him the most. So, he started, with his back turned. You're the nine-tailed fox demon, huh? When there was no immediate reply, he glanced over his shoulder to see that Sunny was rubbing the fabric of his shirt, head bowed, but two blue eyes were watching him, rather intently. He saw the blonde's mouth turn up in a cold smile. Yes, he replied, and his voice was even deeper than before, heavy with something dark. Natsu blinked and purposely turned his back on him, digging around for pants. How had this happened, he becoming friends with the Kyuubi? It was almost inconceivable. The Kyuubi was a giant bloodthirsty fox that had ravaged Konoha several times before it was taken down by the legendary fourth Hokage. It didn't wander into Konoha in the shape of a blonde kid, smelling like peppermint and kissing him to express his mutual like for him. It didn't seem like it would work that way. Not to mention he had been under the impression that Yondaime had killed him. Natsu smells of fear, Sunny's words cut into his thoughts like a knife, and he turned with a pair of black pants, smiling. Do I? Hoping his tone brushed off Sunny's words, and his own scent, now acutely aware that Sunny could smell these things quite well. He handed the pants to the blonde demon, and watched in curiosity at the look of disappointment on his face. No color? The blonde asked hopefully. Purple. Natsu gave a sigh. Sunny, you can't wear purple. Purple is a really hard color to wear, and guys don't normally wear purple, okay? Sunny nodded, fingering the pants, then looked up at him hopefully. Orange? Orange? Who in their right mind would wear orange? That color, if not worn with the utmost care, was socially damaging. He knew, because once at the academy he had worn the orange shirt he had given to Sunny months ago, and all the other kids had laughed at him, calling him stupid. After all, what kind of self-respecting ninja wore orange, a very look-at-me color? I don't have any orange-colored clothing, Natsu said, and seeing the saddened look on his face, conceded, but I'm sure my mom will be glad to get you some later. Sadness disappeared, quickly followed by a blinding smile. At this, his mother came in, a small plate with a sandwich, face flushed in pleasure. Now you eat this all up, honey, she ordered, handing the plate to Sunny and giving him another hug, wiping away a stray tear as she left the room and shut the door. Sunny sniffed at the sandwich, ham, with tomatoes, lettuce, and cheese, and his face turned up in dislike. Natsu took the plate from him and set it aside on his dresser. You don't like ham, Sunny? He asked as the blonde took off the brown pants and pulled on the black ones. What ham? You know, ham, pig. Sunny looked up at him with a smile. I like pig, very juicy. Ah. Natsu was sure the juicy part was because the pig was raw. Well, that's pig, and you should eat it or I'll never hear the end of it. Sunny buttoned up the pants and blinked at the sandwich, then shook his head. Already ate. Not hungry. Fine, Natsu gave yet another sigh, I'll eat it. But let's go, I want to tell Sakura that you're okay. He took the sandwich and opened his window. Both boys crawled through and headed for the Konoha hospital, where Sakura sometimes spent her time. Ever since he had been injured, Sakura had garnered interest in becoming a medic. I don't have much combat talent, she had said to him, but I do have good chakra control, sufficient for the healing arts. Might as well make myself useful. Sakura had been pretty down since he had been injured, and Sasuke hadn't been helping with his cold, distant attitude he had taken ever since he had heard of his brother's appearance in Konoha. Thinking of Uchiha Itachi gave Natsu the chills, he did not want to see that person again. And then he remembered who he had come for. Hey Sunny, you know anyone named Uchiha Itachi? That's a good question, a very familiar voice agreed, and he turned to see Sasuke approaching them. Sasuke had also gotten taller, and apparently better looking, judging by the occasional squeals he had seen girls make. His dark eyes were trained on Sunny rather intently, and he remembered that Sasuke was under the impression that Sunny knew Itachi. Besides Sasuke was Sakura, whose face was torn between complete surprise and the urge to smile. She had been upset at Sunny's supposed demise, not as upset as he had been, and maybe she had been upset to see him so miserable and guilt-stricken. He didn't know which it was, but he was pleased to see that she was at least happy in some way. Sasuke stopped in front of Sunny, whose face took on a slight sinister delight, blue eyes dancing in their sockets. He was actually bouncing on the balls of his feet. Sasuke boy, he crooned, teeth gleaming. So you're alive, Sasuke stated, dark eyes darting to look at Natsu, then back at Sunny. Guess that's a good thing. Natsu noticed that Sunny had stopped bouncing, becoming absolutely motionless, still grinning. But now there was an air of anticipation about him, like he was expecting Sasuke to do something. What do you know about Itachi? Sunny's smile faltered. Who? Sasuke's eyes narrowed dangerously, and both Natsu and Sakura took a step forward. Relax Sasuke, Natsu admonished. I don't think he knows who your brother is in. Shut up Kazuya, Sasuke snapped, cutting him off, eyes not moving from Sunny's face. Why is my brother interested in you? Who are you? So it is true, another voice commented, and they turned to see Shikamaru and Chuji approach. He lifted a lazy hand in greeting. Hey Sunny, long time no see. The tension that had been building was washed away by Shikamaru's calm, accepting demeanor, which he no doubt knew, and Sunny waved a hand in a cheerful greeting. It's been going around that you've come back from the dead. Shikamaru stuffed his hands in his pockets, shoulders slumping. Guess that means extra duty for me. What do you mean? Sakura asked. Shikamaru was the only one out of them all that had been promoted to Chunin, though Natsu had heard that he had been heavily considered, and would have been promoted if not for his extended hospital stay. They've been looking around for Gaara of the Sand. Out of the corner of his eye he saw Sunny's blue eyes flash, and his cheerful face turned serious. He's gone missing for some time now. If he knows you're here Sunny, he'll likely show up. You guys were close. Sunny nodded thoughtfully. He's my minion. Shikamaru's eyebrows rose. In what? Sunny looked over Shikamaru's head, strange blue eyes moving about the village, seeming to look at everything, and nothing at all. Whatever I wish. Shikamaru sent him a sidelong glance before nodding. Well, I hope your wishes are to the benefit of Konoha. I'd hate to have to fight you. Sunny burst into laughter, the same laughter that he had graced the Hokage with, and grinned at the shadow user. You would taste good. Shikamaru's eyes deepened, as if he were remembering something. No, he wouldn't, Natsu interjected quickly. No one here would. We're all friends, right? He gripped Sunny's arm for emphasis. Right? Sunny looked down at his hand, then looked at Natsu. Right. Diadem moved through the forests of Fire Country, his mind tumbling over thoughts he had put aside for some time, thoughts that had resurfaced recently. He could admit, if asked, that he had been a tad bit obsessed with Kyuubi. It happens when one admires another as much as he does. He supposed that in his obsession of searching for Kyuubi, he had missed other important details that could have been useful, like how May other greater demon had disappeared. Had they, like Shikaku and Kyuubi, been captured and locked inside a human's body? This wondering had sent him off toward the border of Sunny's territory to seek out Lurishka, the female water demon that had once told him of Kyuubi's demise. Lurishka was one of the few demons that had not fled when the humans had begun to wield their chakra against demonkind, instead slipping into the depths of the oceans, easily forgotten, since humans could never be lord of the oceans. And though she had been wrong about Kyuubi's fate, he was sure she may know something about the other greater demons that had passed through to this realm. He paused suddenly, black eyes narrowing as he sensed Shikaku approach. From behind a copse of trees the Jinchuriki appeared, green eyes alert, face and cloths smeared with dirt, large gourd still strapped to his back. He stopped and stared at the blue wolf. You've come back, Diadem commented. Not much of a surprise. The human stared at him, waiting, perhaps for permission to enter Fire Country. Then his face cracked, pain flashed through him, and he relaxed as his eyes bled black and yellow, and Shikaku surfaced, grinning. It gets easier every time, the sand demon chuckled. I thank Master Kyuubi for that. I used to struggle with this human every time, but now. The Tanuki continued to grin. Then, well Possessor, what brings you all the way out here? Diadem sat back on his haunches. Information. Shikaku waited. I want to know if the other graders have been trapped as well. I'm seeking Lurishka. Ishka. He could not say the name properly in human tongue. Her. She is useless, spends too much time in the deep depths to know what happens above. She probably can't even find her way to the surface half the time. Shikaku's disdain of Lurishka was apparent. Oh, and I suppose you would know. A mound of sand shot up and settled beside the Tanuki, and Shikaku sat down on it, sending him a smug look. Actually yes, I would, but first, I would like to know how Kyuubi is. Diadem bared his teeth in a wolf's smile. He is well, becoming more like his old self day by day. They shared a mutual pleased look, and the Tanuki picked at his fingernails, sending him a sly look. They got all 9 of us. Well, I think all 9 of us. I've not heard if Isanade Sanbai has been taken. But the others have. I've heard of some of the things Nikomata Nibi has done. All 9? Who had such power to summon the greater demons like this? But listen to this. Shikaku leaned forward on the mound, eyes wild. Apparently, some group of humans calling themselves Akatsuki have been about, collecting the Jinchuriki and extracting us from them. For what? Shikaku gave a wary shrug. That, I do not know. Probably not to our purposes. He sent Diadem a thoughtful look. What do you think would happen if they captured Sunny? Could they turn him back into Kyuubi? Perhaps we should seek them out, find out what they know. That's not a risk I'm willing to take, but this Akatsuki bears further investigation. Shikaku stood up from the mound. What I do know of them is that they are all reportedly S-class ninja, deserters of their villages. They can mean no good for us. Agreed. Diadem stood up and was about to head back, when they noticed humans approaching. Immediately he flashed to his original form and floated up into the trees, Shikaku following him, dark brown dirt gathering about his body as he blended in with the bark. The fuck was that? A human female voice assaulted the forest as the 4 humans came into view. 3 of them were male, 1 large, 2 others of average human size. Language, the large one sighed, and the red-haired female gave him a snarl. Fuck you, fat ass. I'll curse as I please. What are you cursing about? A dark-skinned male human inquired, looking about the area with dark, sharp eyes. I felt some weird-ass chakra just a second ago, the female replied, green eyes scoping the area. Hiding behind a leaf, Diadem recognized their scent. These 4 had held up that purple barrier when the Orochimaru human had been fighting Konoha's Hokage. They must be his. Interesting, Diadem murmured, and watched as the four humans scanned the area. Something is here, the gray-haired one agreed, sounding interested. Why don't you come out, coward? Diadem considered whether it was worth it, curious as to why these four had returned. He flashed into his human form, not caring that he had not brought the clothing with him, and dropped down onto the forest floor, examining them as they stared back. The female spoke first. The hell are your clothes, man? I don't want to see your junk. The gray-haired one snorted, but the dark-skinned one's eyes narrowed. I remember you, he said, eyes wary. The gray-haired one pulled out a kunai. Who is he, Kidomaru? I remember seeing him outside our barrier, watching us. Konohanin then, the large one concluded, but his facial expression said that he was unsure. Who are you? The gray one asked, and Diadem sniffed the air, taking in their individual scents. They were curious, wary, but not frightened, and they smelled of the snake-human Orochimaru. Diadem, he replied, and their brows moved together. I don't recognize your accent, the female said. Where are you from? What's your business here? You're Orochimaru's pack, yes? Let's kill the creepy bastard, the female exclaimed suddenly, pulling out a small wooden stick, a flute, and blew into it. Strange sounds permeated the air, thick, heavy, and Diadem watched in cold silence as three demons slunk from the shadows of the forest, weak demons, no more powerful than Zorn. Do you like my doki? The stupid human female asked, jumping into the trees along with the other three humans. They'll sure as hell like you, she laughed. The demons paused when their eyes fell on Diadem, whose thin gray lips curled in disdain. What's this? He hissed, stepping forward. Serving humans? The three demons stepped back, stinking of fear. We do not truly serve her, the one in the middle assured, we only. But Diadem did not want to hear excuses. First the spirits, now demonkin. They were practically chased from the earth realm, only to return as servants. He was on the demon before it had finished speaking, flashing into his light form and sinking into its chest. Inside, he crashed into its mind, crushing thought, seeing that the whole pack had signed contracts with this human female in exchange for devouring any of her opponents. He turned to its kin, one had already returned back to the spiritual plane, but the other had not been quick enough. With its brother he grabbed the other's arm and crushed it. The demon cried out and dug his claws into his stomach, carving out a gaping hole. Diadem shut off the pain receptors and went for the other demon's throat, sinking his teeth into his flesh and chewing his way through. The demon screeched, clawing at his brother's back and shoulders even as he arrived at the neck bone and gnawed his way through. Above the screams he heard the discordant notes of the flute, and felt a tug on the body he possessed just as he chewed through the other side of the demon. Quickly he exited the body he had possessed as it disappeared in a puff of smoke and turned toward the female. She's dead, Diadem thought angrily as he whipped down into the foliage, sinking into the earth. The hell? The female muttered, scanning the area and seeing no sign of him. What the fuck was that guy? She dropped down to the ground and moved toward the dead demon, head severed. The others carefully moved toward her. Did you hear his voice? The large one asked, and the female snarled. I'm not deaf, fat ass. While the female was distracted he moved up toward her foot and sank into her flesh. The female quickly lifted her foot in response to the cold sensation, but saw nothing. From above, Chakra watched as the group moved uneasily away from the body. Seemed to me like your doki were afraid of him, never seen them hesitate like that. Let's go, the gray-haired ninja commanded. We got an appointment with an Uchiha. They disappeared into the trees, though the girl paused to stare angrily at the body. The fuck was he? She muttered before following them towards Konoha. Most of the dirt fell away from him as he moved from the tree, eyes thoughtful as he stared down at the dead demon. He forgot how deadly possessing demons were. The gourd popped open and he let sand dribble out and over to the body, watching as it ground up the flesh. He remembered to be wary of Diadem. Sonny! He winced as Konohamaru's shriek assaulted his ears, and the small boy jumped on him, grinning madly. I thought you were dead, man. Sonny scowled. Why did everyone think he was dead? The worst damage in his opinion, had been his arm being cut off, and he couldn't see how that could have killed him. His lungs had long healed before his arm decided it was properly fixed. Hey Konoha, he greeted, patting the human's hair affectionately. The small human scowled. It's Konohamaru. Then he was grinning again. Guess what? I'm a genin now. Beside him, Natsu made a sound of surprise. You passed your exam? Why didn't you tell me? I could have taken you out to celebrate. Konohamaru's grin faltered. Yeah, but you were still in the hospital. Sunny saw Natsu's consternation increase, and his face darkened slightly. Oh yeah, sorry about that. So, who's your sensei? Ebisu-sensei, Konohamaru replied happily again. Moegi and Udon on my team, of course. He suddenly paused, looking up at Sunny uncertainly. Which reminds me, who's going to be your sensei now that Ebisu-sensei has 3 of us? Sunny frowned. That was a good question. He didn't want it to be Jiraiya, he didn't like Jiraiya, and Kakashi leader had Natsu, Sakura, and Sasuke boy. He didn't know anyone else. He needed someone powerful though, like that Orochimaru. He thought on what Diadem wanted, to go see this Orochimaru, to devour his brain, and suddenly, it didn't seem that bad of an idea. Maybe he should seek him out. It would not be hard to find him. There was that human Kabuto, or even better, Sasuke boy. Sasuke boy had faintly smelled of snakes lately, actually, ever since the prelims. Perhaps the two should talk. Natsu's mother insisted that he stay the night, and kept pushing human food at him, which was getting on his nerves. He did not like bread, or potatoes, or noodles, of any of his meat cooked. Whenever he tried to tell her this, Natsu would quickly cut him off with quick words and nervous eyes, until it was clear that he didn't want Sunny saying anything about his preferences. Natsu's father seemed too shocked to see him to say much. He learned to play cards until Natsu was too tired to continue, and then he sat for an hour watching the humans sleep. Finally, when the others in the dwelling had fallen asleep, he climbed through the window and headed out into the village. Gaara's here. Zorn's message drifted through the silence, and he paused, smiling. So Gaara had come. For another hour he wandered Konoha, looking to pick up Sasuke's scent, until it drifted toward him. He followed it to the training grounds, where he spied the human practicing the same fire jutsu he had used against him back when they had met. He wandered over, and immediately the dark-eyed boy spotted him. Sasuke boy, he hailed, and the human glared. Stop calling me that. He moved away from the wooden post he had set fire to and waited for him to approach. He stood near the other and smiled. How come you not attack me yet? What? Sasuke boy looked a little surprised. The game. Sasuke just stared at him, the light from the flames causing shadows to drift about the hollows of his face. You know, you burn me, I drown you, then you. He gave a suggestive wave of his hand to mimic payback. Sasuke boy stared at him another span before he could see realization dawn in his eyes. You think that was a game? Sunny nodded and smiled, then hesitated as he saw incredulity in the other's eyes. I've been waiting for next move for months. Sasuke sent him a sidelong glance. You're crazy, he said and turned away from him and began to walk away. Sunny was at a loss. All this time Sasuke boy had been planning nothing. Well, that just put him in a downright nasty mood. He kicked a rock, and it hit the back of Sasuke boy's calf. The boy paused and glared back at him. Sunny grinned. What are you doing here? Sasuke asked suddenly, and his grin faltered. Not the response he had been hoping for. Why did you really come to Konoha? Revenge, was his simple reply, and he saw interest flash through the boy's eyes. He looked like he wanted to ask why, and on whom, but pride kept him silent and staring. Sunny gave a little trill, turning his head and baring his teeth in a grin. They kill my family, so I kill them, soon, eventually. Sasuke stared at him, dark eyes full with something, understanding, Sunny thought. You have family, Sasuke boy? He asked, and there, yes, a minute flinch. No human would have been able to see it with all the conflicting shadows, but he saw it well. No? Someone take them away. Sasuke's face became hard, stricken, but still he said nothing. I look for Snake Human, Orochimaru. You know him, yes? You bring me to him. I don't know him, Sasuke boy snapped, but Sunny could tell he wanted to. And what of you? How do you know Itachi? There was hate in the way he said that name. Sunny shrugged. I not know this Itachi. And why should I? Sasuke boy scowled, looked at him then turned and walked away, only glancing back once to see him watching. Good. Now, if it came to some point that Sasuke boy were to meet up with Orochimaru, he would mention Sunny. He heard someone approaching from behind, a brief scent, Kakashi leader, and he turned to the human with a wary smile. The human was in his ninja attire, eyes alert and watchful, spying the retreating back of Sasuke. Shouldn't you be asleep at Natsu's? He asked, and Sunny shrugged. I don't sleep. The man stared at him, and he back, patiently waiting for the words that sat just behind that mask. You know, I don't think you have an iota of loyalty towards Konoha, and I can't imagine what truly keeps you here. Is it your friendship with Natsu? Konohamaru? Sunny hadn't a clue what iota meant, but he imagined it to be the bad word in the sentence. He chose his words carefully in his head before he spoke them. I have loyalty to the land, because all of Fire Country is mine, and has been for a very long time, and no one will take it from me. Not demon, nor human. I am master here, and always will be. Kakashi leader sighed. I suppose that's the best we'll get out of you. Yes, Sunny agreed, before he hopped away towards the forest, ready to greet his red-haired friend. The day had been full of greetings. Inside the human female Tayuya, Diadem settled in the pit of her chest, waiting. He didn't invade her mind, which was in him to do, mostly because it would alert her of his presence, which he was wont to do until he felt the time was right. Occasionally she would rub her chest, a strange cold spot that she gave less than half a mind to worry about, having other, more important thoughts. So he waited. That's it for part 6. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.